My ex-wife, who happens to be the bank manager, publicly embarrassed me just because I asked to withdraw $250. She smirked and said, "We don't serve beggars here." A few minutes later, I made a request for $4.20 billion, and the whole bank came to a standstill. My name's Julian Hart, and if you looked at me right now, sitting in my worn-out armchair with a mug of gas station coffee and yesterday's sweatpants, you'd probably think I peaked somewhere around community college. And honestly, that's exactly what my ex-wife thought too. Still thinks, actually. Clarissa's got this whole narrative built up in her head where I'm the sad epilogue to her success story, the before picture in her glow-up journey, the cautionary tale she tells at wine nights about settling too early. I'm 43 years old, and according to her, I'm a professional nobody, a title she's been more than happy to broadcast to anyone within earshot for the past 3 years since our divorce became final. Let me paint you a picture of Clarissa Montgomery Hart, or as she calls herself now, Clarissa Montgomery, because apparently my last name was holding her back from her destiny, or whatever. She's a bank manager these days. Not just any bank manager. She'll correct you real quick on that. But the branch manager of Summit Trust Bank's downtown location, which she mentions approximately 47 times per conversation. Smart woman, I'll give her that. Ambitious as hell, climbed that corporate ladder like it owed her money, and she's got this whole boss babe aesthetic down to a science. Blazers that could cut glass, heels that echo through hallways like a countdown to someone's performance review, and this smile that's 60% crest white strips and 40%, "I'm better than you, and we both know it." The woman's allergic to humility the way some people are allergic to gluten. She breaks out in hives if she goes more than 10 minutes without reminding someone of her accomplishments. Me? I'm the quiet one. The boring one. The guy who apparently peaked when I fixed her parents' Wi-Fi router 5 years ago during Thanksgiving dinner, which, by the way, her dad still brings up like I performed open-heart surgery. Remember when Julian fixed the internet? That was something. Yeah, Dad, riveting stuff. Give me a medal. I spent 6 years married to this woman. 6 years of trying to be enough for someone who treated contentment like a character flaw. We had a decent life, or so I thought. A little house in the suburbs, a decent couch, a coffee maker that worked most of the time, and each other. But somewhere along the way, Clarissa decided that decent was just another word for dead inside. And ambition became sexier than loyalty, success more attractive than stability, and basically anything became better than being married to a guy who wore Costco jeans and didn't feel the need to post his entire life on Instagram. Enter Tanner. Tanner fucking Westbrook. Yeah, that's his actual middle name. I checked. Okay, I didn't check, but it should be, because this guy is the human embodiment of every finance bro cliche you've ever rolled your eyes at. He's a stockbroker, and I use that term loosely because his main talent seems to be losing other people's money while somehow maintaining the confidence of a man who's never been wrong about anything in his entire life. The dude talks about crypto like it's his religion, drops terms like disruption and synergy into casual conversation, and wears those unnecessarily tight suits that make him look like a Ken doll someone left too close to a radiator. Clarissa met him at some banking conference. One of those networking events where people drink cheap Chardonnay and pretend to be interested in each other's quarterly projections. And apparently, his pitch about blockchain technology and his Porsche lease was just too irresistible. The divorce was loud, like really loud. Not Jerry Springer loud, but definitely loud enough that our neighbors knew the exact timeline of our relationship's collapse and probably took notes. Clarissa made sure everyone knew she was leaving me for someone more driven, someone who understood her ambitions, someone who wasn't content with mediocrity. Her words, not mine, though she said them to my face during our last argument, which took place in a Cheesecake Factory parking lot, because apparently that's where modern love goes to die. The love was dead, had been for a while, honestly, but we kept up appearances for way too long, doing that thing couples do where they're basically roommates who occasionally argue about whose turn it is to buy toilet paper. By the end, the only thing we still shared was her constant, burning need to prove to everyone, especially me, that she was so much better off without me, that leaving was the best decision she ever made, that her life was basically a champagne commercial now, while mine was presumably a sad country song. Spoiler alert, she wasn't better off. I mean, She got the Instagram-worthy life she wanted, the fancy job title, the boyfriend with the least luxury car, the brunch photos with her equally insufferable friends. But better off? Nah. I could tell from her eyes during our last few court-mandated interactions. There's a difference between happy and busy, between fulfilled and just filling time. But hey, that wasn't my problem anymore. After the dust settled and the lawyers finally stopped calling, I rebuilt my life quietly. No flashy cars that scream, I'm compensating for something. No Instagram lifestyle where I document my breakfast like it's breaking news. No desperate attempts to prove anything to anyone. Just peace, coffee, lots of coffee, the good stuff I learned to brew myself because Starbucks prices are basically robbery, and coding. I dove back into what I loved before Clarissa convinced me that hobbies were fine, but they didn't pay for the kind of life she wanted. I spent my nights in front of my laptop, lines of code scrolling past like digital poetry, building things, fixing things, creating systems and algorithms that made sense in a way human relationships never seemed to. It was quiet. It was mine. It was exactly what I needed. But here's the thing about fate, and I mean this with all sincerity. Fate has a twisted, almost sadistic sense of humor. Like, if fate were a person, it would be that friend who sets you up on blind dates that go horrifically wrong, just so they have a good story to tell later. Because the universe, in its infinite comedy, decided that the same woman who mocked my boring life, who told our mutual friends that I'd never amount to anything, who literally used the phrase, "he has no ambition," in our divorce mediation like it was a clinical diagnosis, would end up working for a bank that technically, legally, and ironically worked for me. Yeah, you read that right. Clarissa Montgomery, branch manager extraordinaire, boss babe supreme. The woman who couldn't stop telling people about her important job and her impressive title and her corner office with the view of the parking garage, was about to find out that in the grand corporate structure of the financial world, she was basically my employee. She just didn't know it yet. Nobody did. And that's exactly how I wanted it, at least for now, because the reveal, the moment when her perfectly constructed reality came crashing down like a Jenga tower made of ego and expensive blazers, that was going to be sweeter than any revenge I could have plotted, mainly because I didn't even have to plot it. The universe did all the heavy lifting. I just had to show up and withdraw some money. Well, a lot of money. Like, enough money to make regional directors sweat through their suits kind of money. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, I had to deal with Mrs. Keller's heating bill, walk into that bank like any regular customer, and watch Clarissa's face when she realized that the nobody she divorced was about to become her biggest problem. The boring guy in the Costco jeans was about to make her very interesting week very, very interesting. And honestly, I couldn't wait. Look, I've seen some messy divorces in my time. Friends, colleagues. That one guy at the gym who wouldn't shut up about his custody battle, but mine with Clarissa? That thing had more drama than a full season of one of those telenovelas my abuela used to watch, except with less passionate declarations and more passive-aggressive text messages sent at 2 in the morning. We're talking about a relationship collapse so spectacular that I'm pretty sure our lawyers are still dining out on the stories. But here's the kicker. The real entertainment wasn't even the divorce itself. It was watching Clarissa's family react to it, like I was some kind of tumor they'd finally managed to remove, and now they could all breathe easier and get back to their regularly scheduled programming of being moderately wealthy and extremely judgmental. The Montgomery family treated me like I was the house cat for the entire 6 years I was married into their little dynasty. You know the type. They'd feed me occasionally, usually at mandatory holiday gatherings where attendance was tracked like a corporate HR department, pat me on the head when I did something they deemed useful, and then completely ignore my existence the rest of the time unless they needed their computer fixed or their smart TV set up, because God forbid any of them read an instruction manual. I was furniture that occasionally spoke, a decorative husband who was acceptable enough to have around, but not quite impressive enough to brag about at the country club. Oh, Julian? Yes, he's very nice. He has kind eyes. That's what Clarissa's mother Diana used to say about me, which is family speak for he's broke, but at least he's polite and doesn't steal the silverware. Diana Montgomery is one of those women who perfected the art of the compliment-insult hybrid, where everything she says sounds nice on the surface, but leaves you feeling vaguely inadequate for the next 3 to 5 business days. Julian, you look so comfortable in those jeans. Translation: Why don't you own adult pants? It's so refreshing that you don't care about material things. Translation, we noticed you drive a Honda. You're so down to earth. Translation, we expected more from our daughter. She'd smile with all her teeth, the kind of smile that politicians practice in mirrors, and touch my arm like we were co-conspirators in some scheme. Except the scheme was just her tolerating my presence at family functions while quietly hoping Clarissa would wake up one day and upgrade to someone with a hyphenated last name and a trust fund. Her father, Richard, was somehow worse because at least Diana was upfront about her disappointment. Richard had this way of looking through me, like I was made of glass, or more accurately, like I was made of something so inconsequential that his eyes just naturally skipped over me to find something more interesting to focus on, like the wallpaper or his phone or literally anything else. During family dinners, he'd ask me about work with the enthusiasm of someone asking about dental procedures. Still doing the computer thing, Julian? Yeah, Richard, still doing the computer thing, still making those ones and zeros dance, still living that thrilling IT life that you can barely pretend to understand. He'd nod, say something like, good, good, and then immediately pivot to talking about golf or the stock market or whatever rich guys discuss when they're not busy ignoring their sons-in-law. And Clarissa's sister Tiffany? She was actually decent to me, which in that family made her practically a saint. She'd at least make eye contact and ask genuine questions, though I always suspected she felt bad for me the way you feel bad for a rescue dog that's not quite cute enough to get adopted quickly. How are you holding up, Julian? She'd whisper at family events, like I was surviving some kind of hostage situation, which, looking back, wasn't entirely inaccurate. So when the divorce finally happened, when Clarissa packed her bags and moved in with Tanner and his aggressively modern downtown loft that probably cost more per month than I made in 6, the Montgomery family didn't just accept it, they celebrated. I'm talking about a mini party, and I'm not even exaggerating. I heard through the grapevine, specifically through Tiffany, who still texted me occasionally because she's a decent human being, that Diana literally opened champagne. Champagne. Like their daughter leaving her marriage was some kind of achievement to commemorate, like she'd graduated from the school of matrimonial mistakes and was finally moving on to bigger and better things. They toasted to Clarissa's fresh start and new beginnings, and probably made some passive-aggressive comment about how she was finally free to reach her full potential. As if I'd been holding her hostage in our moderately priced suburban home with my reasonable career and stable income. Meanwhile, while they were popping bottles and congratulating themselves on being rid of me, while Clarissa was updating her LinkedIn with her new promotion to branch manager at Summit Trust Bank and making sure every single person in her network knew about it with a post that was basically a humble brag dissertation, I was quietly building something they couldn't even begin to comprehend. See, while they were measuring success in job titles and luxury car leases and social media engagement, I was operating on a completely different level, playing a game they didn't even know existed. I took my heartbreak, my anger, my wounded pride, and all those nights I couldn't sleep because my brain wouldn't shut up about everything that went wrong, and I channeled it into something productive, something massive, something that would make Clarissa's impressive bank manager position look like a lemonade stand in comparison. I didn't need revenge, not in the traditional sense. I didn't need to slash tires or send anonymous emails or do any of that petty nonsense that people do when they're hurt. What I needed was patience. I needed time to build, to code, to create, to transform my skills into something so substantial that when the moment came, and I knew it would come because the universe loves irony, the reveal would be devastating without me having to do anything except exist. Revenge wasn't the goal. It was just a bonus feature, like when you buy a car and it comes with heated seats you didn't know you needed but now can't live without. I spent months, then years, working in silence. No announcements, no updates, no LinkedIn posts about my journey or my growth or any of that performative nonsense that people do when they need external validation for their accomplishments. I just worked. My apartment was modest, my car was practical, my clothes came from places where you could return things without a receipt, and to anyone looking at me from the outside, I was exactly what Clarissa said I was, a guy who was going nowhere, doing nothing, living small. Her family probably thought I was depressed, that I was struggling, that the divorce had broken me, and I was just limping through life trying to figure out how to move on from losing their precious daughter. They had no idea. None of them did. Not Clarissa with her corner office and her motivational posters. Not Diana with her barely concealed relief that I was out of the family. Not Richard with his complete indifference to my existence. Not even Tiffany with her sympathetic texts. They couldn't see what I was building because they were too busy looking down at me to notice that I was constructing something above their heads, something so far beyond their understanding that when it finally came crashing down on them, they wouldn't even see it coming. And Summit Trust Bank, Clarissa's beloved workplace, the institution she was so proud to represent, the place where she felt important and powerful and successful, that bank, through a series of corporate structures and holding companies and financial relationships that most people don't bother to understand, was connected to my world in a way that was about to become very, very relevant. The irony was almost too perfect, like the universe had written a joke specifically for me and was just waiting for the right moment to deliver the punchline. I didn't need to seek revenge. I just needed to be patient enough to let it find me. And oh boy, was it about to find me in the most spectacular way possible, gift-wrapped with a bow made of Clarissa's own arrogance and delivered right to her perfectly organized desk with the nameplate that probably cost more than it should have. It was a Thursday morning, one of those cold ones where the air bites at your face the second you step outside and makes you question why humans ever decided to live anywhere that wasn't tropical. I was in my apartment, minding my own business, probably 3 cups of coffee deep and watching some documentary about deep-sea creatures because that's the kind of riveting content you consume when you're single and it's 9 a.m. on a weekday. Then my phone rang with that particular tone I'd set for my neighbor, Mrs. Keller, and I knew immediately that something was wrong because Mrs. Keller only called for 2 reasons. She'd baked something and wanted to share it, or something had gone catastrophically wrong in her life, and she needed help. This was definitely the second thing. I could hear it in her voice before she even said hello, that watery, shaky quality that meant she'd been crying or was about to start. Mrs. Keller is 74 years old, lives alone in the apartment next to mine, makes a killer apple pie, and is basically the human embodiment of everything good about the generation that still writes thank you cards and remembers your birthday without Facebook reminding them. She's also on a fixed income, which is a polite way of saying the government sends her a check every month that barely covers her expenses, and any unexpected cost is basically a financial earthquake. "Julian, honey, I'm so sorry to bother you," she started, and I could already tell this was going to wreck my day emotionally because Mrs. Keller apologizes for existing, which drives me crazy. It's the heating bill. It's doubled this month, something about rate increases and cold weather adjustments, and my pension check, it hasn't arrived yet. They say it's delayed, maybe another week, and I need $250 to cover the difference or they're going to shut off my heat. And Julian, I can't be without heat. Not in this weather, I'll freeze. She was crying by the end of it, and I was already grabbing my jacket because there was exactly 0 chance I was letting this woman freeze in her apartment while I had money in the bank. "Mrs. Keller, don't worry about it. I got you. I'm heading to the bank right now. I'll have the money to you within the hour, okay? Don't cry, we're going to fix this." She tried to protest, tried to tell me she'd pay me back, that she didn't want to be a burden, all that stuff that good people say when they're in crisis and feel guilty about needing help. I told her to stop it, that she'd made me approximately 40 pies over the years, and this was just settling the debt, which made her laugh a little through the tears. So I threw on my jacket, my regular, normal person jacket that I'd bought on sale at Target, not some designer thing with a label that costs more than rent, and headed out into the cold. I didn't even think about which bank I was going to. I just walked to the closest one, which happened to be Summit Trust Bank's downtown branch, because the universe has a sense of humor that borders on sadistic and apparently wasn't done with me yet. I walked in through those big glass doors, the kind that make you feel like you're entering a spaceship or a really boring museum, and headed straight for the counter. That's when I heard it. That voice. The one I'd heard in my head for 3 years telling me I wasn't good enough, wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't enough, period. Except now it was real, and it was coming from behind me, dripping with that particular brand of sweetness that's actually pure vinegar disguised as sugar. Well, Julian Hart, didn't think I'd see you here. I turned around, and there she was. Clarissa, my ex-wife, standing in her perfectly tailored blazer that probably cost what I used to spend on groceries for a month, her hair done up in that professional style that says, "I'm important and I know it," holding a tablet like it was a scepter and she was the queen of banking. She had that grin on her face, that same grin I'd seen 1,000 times during our marriage whenever she felt like she'd won an argument or proven a point, the kind of smile that could curdle milk and make babies cry. I hadn't noticed the nameplate when I walked in. I hadn't noticed that Summit Trust was her bank, that this was her branch, that I just walked into enemy territory wearing sweatpants and yesterday's determination. But she'd noticed me immediately, probably spotted me the second I walked through the door like a predator noticing wounded prey wandering into her territory. "What brings you here?" she asked, and I could see her eyes scanning me up and down, taking inventory of my outfit, my posture, my entire existence, probably calculating my net worth based on my shoe quality. "Looking for a loan? I have to tell you, Julian, your credit score probably isn't what it used to be. Divorce is hard on the finances, isn't it?" She said this loud enough that the people around us could hear, because humiliating me privately wasn't enough. She needed an audience. I took a breath, reminded myself that I was here for Mrs. Keller, not for whatever psychological warfare Clarissa was trying to initiate. "I just need to withdraw $250, I said, keeping my voice level, professional, boring. Just a regular guy doing a regular banking transaction on a regular Thursday morning. The laugh that came out of her mouth could have shattered windows. It echoed across the lobby like a siren, making heads turn, making people stop their conversations mid-sentence to see what was so funny. $250? She repeated, like I'd just asked her to explain quantum physics or requested a small loan of $1 million. "You came all the way down here, to my bank, to withdraw $250? She was loving this. I could see it in her eyes, that gleeful spark that came from feeling superior, from having power over someone who used to be her equal. Then she said it, the line that would change everything, the sentence that would come back to haunt her in approximately 24 hours. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to that condescending tone that managers use when they're about to crush someone's spirit, and said, $250? Julian, we don't serve beggars here. The whole room went silent. Like, you could have heard a pin drop, a mouse sneeze, a single dust particle hitting the floor. It was that kind of silence that makes your ears ring because the absence of sound is somehow louder than noise. The guy at the counter holding a coffee cup literally stopped mid-sip, his cup frozen halfway to his mouth, like someone had pressed pause on his life. A woman filling out a deposit slip looked up with her eyes wide, her mouth forming a little O of shock. Even the printer in the corner seemed to pause awkwardly, like it was embarrassed on behalf of everyone present. I just stood there, looking at her, watching her bask in her moment of perceived victory. She thought she'd destroyed me. She thought this was her mic drop moment, her grand declaration that she was better than me, that she'd won the divorce, that leaving me was the best decision she'd ever made. She was practically glowing with satisfaction, probably already composing the story she'd tell her friends later about how she'd run into her loser ex-husband and put him in his place. But here's the thing about moments like these. They're only satisfying if you're right. If you actually know what you're talking about. If the person you're humiliating is actually who you think they are. Clarissa had no idea who I was anymore. She was operating on 3-year-old information, making assumptions based on outdated data, thinking she was playing checkers when I'd been playing chess this entire time. I smiled. Not a big smile, not a dramatic one, just a small, calm smile that probably looked polite to everyone watching but meant so much more. "You're right, Clarissa," I said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. "You don't serve beggars here, but you're about to find out who you do serve." She blinked, confused, that confident grin faltering just slightly. What's that supposed to mean? I didn't answer. I just turned around, walked back through those glass doors into the cold morning air, and headed home. Mrs. Keller would get her money. I'd find another bank, another way. But Clarissa? Clarissa had just made the biggest mistake of her professional career, and she didn't even know it yet. She'd humiliated the wrong person, on the wrong day, in front of the wrong witnesses. Tomorrow was going to be very, very interesting. And I was going to need more coffee. I got back to my apartment, kicked off my shoes, and went straight to the kitchen to make coffee. Not the cheap instant stuff you grab when you're running late, but the real deal, the kind where you grind the beans yourself and the smell fills your entire apartment like an aromatic therapy session. This was the drink of calm billionaires. Or at least that's what I told myself as I watched the dark liquid drip into my mug with the chipped handle that I refused to replace because it still worked perfectly fine. Some people meditate. Some people do yoga. Some people punch walls. Me? I make coffee and let the ritual of it smooth out the sharp edges of whatever nonsense the day has thrown at me. And today had thrown some grade A nonsense at me in the form of my ex-wife's smug face and that line about not serving beggars. I should have been angry. Maybe a normal person would have been angry. But instead, I felt something else, anticipation. That tingly feeling you get right before something monumentally entertaining is about to happen. Like when you're watching a horror movie and you can see the character walking toward the obvious danger and you're just sitting there with your popcorn thinking, "Oh buddy, you have no idea what's coming." I sat down at my desk, the same desk I bought off Craigslist 5 years ago for $40 from a college student who needed beer money, and opened my laptop. The screen flickered to life, displaying my regular desktop, a generic mountain landscape that came pre-installed because I couldn't be bothered to personalize it. But that's not what I was interested in. I opened a specific browser, entered a specific URL that wasn't saved in my bookmarks or history, typed in a password that was approximately 80 characters long, and included symbols that most people don't even know exist on their keyboards, and waited for the screen to change. And there it was. The dark dashboard of Helix Capital Systems, glowing against the black background like something out of a sci-fi movie, displaying numbers that would make most people's eyes cross and their brains short-circuit. My private investment AI, the baby I'd been building and refining and perfecting for the past 3 years, the thing that managed. And I need you to really hear this. Maybe sit down if you're not already sitting. $4.2 billion in global assets. Yeah, that's billion. With a B. As in, boy oh boy is Clarissa going to lose her mind when she finds out. As in, more money than most people will see in 100 lifetimes. As in, the kind of wealth that doesn't just change your life. It changes the lives of everyone around you. And the lives of people you've never met. And probably the lives of people who haven't been born yet, because generational wealth is a real thing, and I was sitting on enough of it to start a dynasty if I wanted to. Which I absolutely did not, because that sounded exhausting. Let me back up and explain how a regular guy, a nobody, according to his ex-wife, ended up controlling enough money to buy a small country or at least a really nice island somewhere tropical. After Clarissa left, after the divorce papers were signed and she drove off into the sunset with Tanner and his leased Porsche, I was a mess. I'm not going to lie about that and pretend I was fine. I was the opposite of fine. I was that special kind of broken that comes from having someone you loved look at you and decide you weren't enough, that your best wasn't good enough, that everything you thought you were building together was actually just you building something by yourself while she waited for something better to come along. So I did what any reasonable person does when they're emotionally destroyed. I threw myself into work. Except my work wasn't a normal 9-to-5 job where you clock in, push papers around, and clock out. My work was coding, building, creating systems that could think faster than humans, predict patterns that most people couldn't see even if you drew them a diagram. I'd always been good with computers, good with algorithms, good with seeing how things connected in ways that weren't obvious. It's why I'd been successful in my previous career, even if Clarissa never seemed impressed by it because I wasn't a doctor or a lawyer or whatever prestigious profession she thought I should have pursued. But after the divorce, I didn't just code. I obsessed. I spent 16-hour days in front of my laptop, surviving on coffee and spite, building an AI that could analyze market movements, predict trends, identify opportunities that human traders would miss because they were too busy having feelings and making emotional decisions. I studied everything: stock markets, cryptocurrency, commodities, real estate, international banking systems, all of it. I read papers written by economists who had more degrees than I had houseplants. I watched the markets move like other people watch sports, seeing patterns in the chaos, finding order in the randomness. And then I built Helix. Named it after the double helix of DNA because this thing was going to evolve, adapt, learn, and become something that could survive in the brutal ecosystem of global finance. I started small, really small. I took my divorce settlement, which wasn't much because we'd agreed to split everything 50-50 and neither of us had much to split, and I put it into the system. Watched it work. Watched it make decisions faster than I could blink. Watched it turn a few $1,000s into 10,000, then 50,000, then 100,000. While Clarissa was posting boss lady selfies on LinkedIn, doing that thing where she'd take a photo of her laptop at a coffee shop with a caption about grinding or hustle culture, or whatever motivational nonsense was trending that week, I was building an empire in silence. She was performing success for an audience. I was actually creating it in a way she couldn't even comprehend. Every time she posted about closing a big deal at the bank, about hitting her quarterly targets, about getting recognition from her regional manager, I was watching my system move millions of dollars across markets so efficiently that it would have made her head spin. The beauty of Helix wasn't just that it made money. Lots of programs can make money if you're lucky or the market's good. The beauty was that it predicted market movements down to the millisecond. It could see a stock was going to jump 30 seconds before it happened. It could identify a cryptocurrency crash minutes before the panic started. It understood patterns in human behavior, in market psychology, in the way fear and greed moved through financial systems like weather patterns. And it was learning constantly, getting smarter with every trade, every transaction, every microsecond of data it processed. Within a year, I'd turned that initial investment into serious money. Not billionaire money yet, but enough that I could have bought a nice house, a fancy car, all the things Clarissa thought I could never afford. But I didn't. I lived in my same apartment, drove my same car, wore my same Target jeans, because the goal wasn't to look rich. The goal was to be so absurdly wealthy that looking rich would have been redundant and frankly kind of tacky. By year 2, I was managing 9 figures. That's hundreds of millions for anyone keeping track at home. And I did it all through a shell company, a maze of legal entities and offshore accounts that were completely legitimate. I had lawyers and accountants making sure of that, but completely anonymous. Nobody knew who owned Helix Capital, not the investors who trusted the system with their money, not the financial institutions that handled the transactions, not even the board members who took orders from an encrypted account named Jay Hale, which was technically me, though they assumed Jay Hale was some mysterious billionaire genius operating out of Silicon Valley or Wall Street, or maybe a private island somewhere. Plot twist: Jay Hale was a guy in sweatpants eating leftover pizza in a rent-controlled apartment, and that guy was me. Now here's where it gets really funny, and I mean laugh until you cry. Universe has a sixth sense of humor funny. As Helix grew, as the portfolio expanded, I needed legitimate financial institutions to handle certain transactions, to hold accounts, to process the ungodly amount of money flowing through the system. So my team. Yes, I had a team by this point, lawyers and accountants and financial advisors who all worked for the mysterious Jay Hale, set up relationships with various banks around the world. And one of those banks, through a series of corporate structures and holding companies that most people don't understand and don't care to understand, was connected to Summit Trust Bank. That's right, Summit Trust, the bank where Clarissa worked, where she was so proud to be a branch manager, was part of a larger financial network that ultimately handled some of my fund's transactions. Which meant, technically, legally, and hilariously, my ex-wife who called me a beggar and said I'd never amount to anything was essentially working for me. She just had no idea. I laughed when I first discovered this connection. Laughed so hard I spilled coffee all over my desk and had to scramble to save my keyboard. The irony was so perfect, so cosmically absurd, that I couldn't have planned it better if I'd tried. And I didn't try. That's the best part. The universe just handed this to me, gift-wrapped with a bow made of poetic justice. So there I sat, looking at my dashboard, watching $4.2 billion worth of assets being managed by algorithms I'd written, and I realized something. Tomorrow was going to be a very good day. Now, you'd think after getting publicly humiliated by my ex-wife in front of a bank full of witnesses, I want to storm back in there with a megaphone and a PowerPoint presentation about how rich I actually am. Maybe hire a skywriter to spell out my net worth over the building. Really lean into the dramatic reveal like some kind of financial superhero origin story. But that's not how real power works. Real power whispers. Real power doesn't need validation from people who wouldn't understand it anyway. And most importantly, real power knows that the best revenge isn't served hot or cold. It's served in a conference room with a legal team and a meeting agenda that slowly, methodically destroys someone's entire worldview. I wanted this to feel like a calendar invite that ruins lives. You know the kind. Those meeting requests that pop up in your email with an innocuous subject line like quick sync or touch base, but you know, deep in your soul, that someone's about to get fired or a project's about to get canceled or your entire department is being restructured. I wanted Clarissa to walk into a room thinking it was just another boring Thursday meeting, maybe grab a coffee first, check her phone, fix her lipstick, and then have the floor drop out from under her designer heels in the most professional way possible. So I did what any reasonable secret billionaire would do. I called my lawyer. Well, not just my lawyer. Derek Lang was technically my legal counsel, but really he was part lawyer, part strategic advisor, part therapist, and full-time sarcasm expert. The man could find the humor in a tax audit and make contract negotiations feel like comedy shows. I'd hired him about a year into building Helix when things started getting serious and I needed someone who understood both international finance law and how to keep a secret better than a Cold War spy. He was worth every penny of his absolutely obscene hourly rate, and considering I was paying him with money that literally generated itself while I slept, I wasn't exactly counting pennies. I picked up my phone and dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, because Derek Lang doesn't let calls go to voicemail unless he's actively in court or deliberately avoiding someone. And since I paid him enough to buy a yacht every quarter, he definitely wasn't avoiding me. "Morning, boss," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Derek was one of maybe 3 people on the planet who knew my real identity, who understood that Julian Hart, the divorced nobody, and Jay Hale, the mysterious billionaire, were the same person. He thought it was the funniest thing in the world, this double life I was living. Called it my Clark Kent routine, except instead of a phone booth, I just changed from sweatpants to a suit. "Morning, Derek. I need you to set something up for me. This should be good. What happened? Did someone insult your Honda again?" He was referencing the time a valet guy at a fancy restaurant had laughed at my car, and I'd ended up buying the restaurant just to fire him. Okay, I didn't actually do that, but Derek liked to joke that I should have. Better. My ex-wife called me a beggar yesterday. In public. At her bank. There was a pause, and then Derek started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but a full-on, gasping for air laugh that went on for a solid 15 seconds. "Please tell me it was Summit Trust. Please tell me she works at one of our banks. Branch manager, downtown location. Oh, this is Christmas. This is better than Christmas. This is like Christmas and my birthday and the Super Bowl all happening at once. What do you want to do?" I took a sip of my coffee, letting the moment breathe. Set up a meeting with Summit Trust's regional director. Tomorrow if possible. Call it a risk reassessment. Make it sound urgent, but not alarming. You know, that special tone that makes middle managers sweat through their shirts. Done. Who's attending from our side? Representative from Helix Capital. Specifically Jay Hale. Another pause. So, basically you. In a suit. Looking like you have money instead of looking like you're about to fix someone's printer. Exactly. Think you can make it happen? Boss, I can make anything happen. That's why you pay me the big bucks. Is the branch manager going to be in this meeting? That's up to their regional director. But I'm guessing when he hears that Helix Capital wants to discuss their relationship with Summit Trust, he's going to want all hands on deck, including his star branch manager. Derek was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his head, the beautiful legal machinery calculating all the ways this could go. "You're not actually going to pull your funds, are you? That seems excessive." "Derek," she called me a beggar. In front of customers. While I was trying to help my elderly neighbor pay her heating bill. "Okay, yeah, pull the funds. Pull all of them. Burn it down. I'll draft the paperwork. I haven't decided yet what I'm actually going to do. But I want the option. I want to walk into that room with the power to completely destroy her career, and then I'll decide in the moment whether or not I actually pull the trigger. You're a better man than me. I'd have already started transferring assets. That's why you're the lawyer and I'm the client. You get to be ruthless. I get to pretend I'm conflicted about it." He laughed again. "I'll send you the meeting details within the hour. What should I tell them the meeting's about specifically?" "Portfolio review and risk assessment regarding Summit Trust's operational standards and client service protocols. Make it sound technical and boring, but with just enough edge that they know something's wrong. Beautiful. Vague enough to be terrifying, specific enough to sound legitimate. You want me there?" "Absolutely. I need someone to handle the actual legal jargon while I sit there looking mysterious and wealthy. That's what I do best." "Oh, and Julian." "Yeah. You're going to need a better suit than the one you wore to my birthday dinner. That thing looked like you borrowed it from a youth pastor. It's a perfectly good suit. It's a perfectly good suit for someone who makes $50,000 a year and has a Costco membership. You're about to walk into a meeting representing a $4.2 billion fund. Dress like it. I'm texting you the address of my tailor. Tell him I sent you. He'll take care of you. Derek, I don't need. Boss, I love you. But I'm not sitting in a meeting with a secret billionaire who looks like he's about to sell me a used Camry. Get the suit. Expense it. Hell, buy 5 suits. You can afford it. He had a point. I'd been so focused on staying under the radar, on maintaining my cover as regular Julian, the divorced nobody, that I'd forgotten that J. Hale wouldn't shop at Men's Warehouse. J. Hale would have suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. J. Hale would look like money without trying, would walk into a room and make everyone else feel underdressed just by existing. Fine, I'll get the suit. Thank you. Now, let me work my magic. By this time tomorrow, your ex-wife is going to have the worst day of her professional life, and I'm going to have the best story to tell at parties for the next decade. Just keep my real identity quiet. Always do, boss. Always do. He hung up, and I sat there staring at my phone, feeling that anticipation build even higher. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. Though let's be honest, revenge was definitely a factor. This was about showing Clarissa, showing her family, showing everyone who'd ever underestimated me or dismissed me or treated me like I was less than, that they'd been catastrophically wrong. That the quiet guy in the corner, the one who didn't brag or show off or perform his success for social media, was operating on a level they couldn't even comprehend. I finished my coffee, opened my laptop, and sent Mrs. Keller $250 through a different bank, a smaller, friendlier one where nobody knew who I was and nobody cared. Then I opened my calendar and stared at tomorrow's date, imagining Clarissa's face when she realized what was about to happen. Derek was right. This was better than Christmas. This was justice with a really expensive suit and a legal team that could make grown men cry. And I was going to savor every single second of it. But first, I needed to go shopping. Because apparently, even revenge requires proper attire. The next day, I woke up feeling like a character in a movie montage. You know, the kind where the underdog protagonist is about to walk into the final confrontation and the music swells and everything goes into slow motion. Except there was no music, just my alarm clock screaming at me at 6 a.m. And the only thing in slow motion was me trying to figure out how to tie a Windsor knot, because apparently, that's what rich people do with their ties, and I'd been using the same lazy knot for the past 20 years. Derek's tailor had hooked me up, and I'm not going to lie. The suit was incredible. It was this navy blue number that probably cost more than my first car, fit me like it had been painted on by Italian masters, and made me look like I knew what a stock portfolio was without needing to Google it first. The fabric felt like butter, if butter could be woven into clothing, and when I looked at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the guy staring back. This wasn't Julian Hart, the divorced guy who fixed Wi-Fi routers and wore Costco jeans. This was Jay, Hale, mysterious billionaire, and honestly, the guy looked pretty damn good. I paired it with a plain tie, nothing flashy, no patterns that screamed, I'm trying too hard, and shoes that Derek had insisted I buy, which cost more than some people's rent and felt like walking on actual clouds. Real wealth whispers, remember? It doesn't show up in a gold Lumbo blasting rap music. It shows up in a perfectly tailored suit, driving a practical car, looking completely unremarkable except for that indefinable quality that makes people instinctively straighten their posture when you walk into a room. I met Derek outside Summit Trust at 9:45 a.m. He was already there, leaning against his Tesla, because of course Derek drove a Tesla. The man was a walking cliché of successful lawyer stereotypes. And when he saw me, he actually did a double take. Holy shit, he said, which is not typical lawyer vocabulary, but Derek had never been typical. You look like you actually have money. I'm impressed. I didn't think you had it in you. It's just a suit, Derek. No, my friend, that's not just a suit. That's a statement. That's a declaration of war wrapped in Italian wool. Clarissa's going to have a stroke. That's not the goal. Maybe not your goal, but it's definitely going to be a side effect. Come on, let's go ruin some lives. He said this with such enthusiasm that you'd think we were going to Disneyland instead of a bank meeting. But that was Derek. He found joy in the strangest places. usually places where other people found misery and despair. We walked through those same glass doors I'd walked through yesterday. Except this time, everything felt different. Yesterday, I was Julian the nobody, getting $250 from my neighbor. Today I was Jay, Hale, and the energy shift was palpable. The security guard who'd barely glanced at me yesterday actually straightened up and nodded respectfully. The receptionist, who'd been filing her nails and ignoring customers like it was her job description, suddenly became the most attentive person in the building. "Good morning, gentlemen. How can I help you?" she asked, with a smile that was 100% professional and 0% genuine, but at least she was trying. "We have a 10 a.m. meeting with Regional Director Patel," Derek said, handing her a business card that probably cost more to print than my first paycheck. "Representatives from Helix Capital Systems." The change in her demeanor was instant. Her eyes went wide. Her smile went from customer service to actual fear, and she picked up the phone so fast I'm surprised she didn't sprain something. "Mr. Patel, your 10 a.m. is here." "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." She hung up and gestured toward the elevator with a hand that was slightly shaking. "Top floor, executive suite. Mr. Patel will meet you there personally." We rode the elevator in silence, Derek checking his phone and occasionally smirking at whatever he was reading, me trying to keep my heart rate under control, because despite the suit and the confidence and the $4.2 billion sitting in various accounts around the world, I was still human, and this was still terrifying. Not the meeting itself. I'd been in plenty of high-stakes meetings over the past few years, even if they'd been virtual and nobody could see that I was wearing sweatpants below the camera line. But this was personal. This was Clarissa's territory, her domain, the place where she felt powerful and important, and I was about to destroy it. The elevator doors opened, and there he was, Mr. Rajesh Patel, Regional Director, practically vibrating with anxiety. He was a short man in his 50s, wearing a suit that was nice, but not as nice as mine. I noticed that immediately and filed it away as a small victory. And he had that particular expression that middle management gets when they know something's wrong but don't know what yet. Fear mixed with forced professionalism, like a dog that knows it's going to the vet but is trying to act excited about the car ride. "Mr. Hale, such an honor, such an honor." He rushed forward with his hand extended, shaking mine so enthusiastically I thought his arm might fall off. "We're thrilled to have Helix Capital as a partner." "Absolutely thrilled. Please, come this way. We have the conference room prepared." We followed him down a hallway lined with motivational posters about teamwork and success and other corporate nonsense that meant nothing, past offices where employees were pretending to work while obviously trying to see who we were, and into a conference room that was trying way too hard to look impressive. Big table, leather chairs, a view of the parking garage, real luxury stuff. And there, sitting at the table with a tablet in front of her, and that same confident smile from yesterday, was Clarissa. She looked up when we walked in, and I watched in real time as her brain tried to process what her eyes were seeing. First there was confusion. Who are these suit-wearing men? Then recognition. Wait, is that Julian? Then complete and utter bewilderment. Why is Julian here in a suit that costs more than my monthly salary? "Julian," she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the second syllable. "What are you? Why are you?" Mr. Patel looked between us, confused. "You two know each other?" "We used to," I said calmly, pulling out a chair and sitting down like I owned the place. Which, technically, in a weird corporate structure kind of way, I kind of did. Mrs. Montgomery and I were married once. Ancient history. Clarissa's face went through about 15 different colors, landing somewhere between pale and about to vomit. "I don't understand. What's going on? Mr. Patel, why is my ex-husband in this meeting?" Derek, bless him, jumped in with the smooth professionalism of a man who'd done this dance 1,000 times. "Mrs. Montgomery, allow me to introduce Mr. J. Hale, founder and CEO of Helix Capital Systems. Mr. Hale, this is Clarissa Montgomery, branch manager." The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife, packaged it, and sold it as premium awkwardness. Clarissa's mouth opened and closed like a fish that had just been pulled out of water and was trying to figure out where all the oxygen went. "Mr. Patel looked confused, probably trying to do the math on how his branch manager's ex-husband was apparently a billionaire CEO. I let the moment breathe, let it stretch out until it was almost uncomfortable, and then I leaned forward slightly, folded my hands on the table, and looked at Mr. Patel directly. Thank you for taking this meeting on such short notice. I'll get straight to the point. Helix Capital is withdrawing all its assets from your institution. Effective immediately. Mr. Patel's face went from confused to horrified so fast, I'm pretty sure he broke some kind of record. All of them. Surely you mean. All $4.2 billion, I confirmed, keeping my voice level and professional, like I was ordering coffee instead of essentially pulling the financial equivalent of ripping out someone's spine. Every account, every fund, every asset currently held or managed through Summit Trust or its parent companies. We'll be transferring them to other institutions by end of business today. Clarissa made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. 4.2 billion? She was staring at me like I'd just grown a second head, or maybe like I'd announced I was actually an alien who'd been wearing a Julian Hart costume this whole time. That's not possible. You can't. I turned to look at her, really look at her, and smiled the kind of smile you give someone when you're about to deliver the punchline to a joke they didn't know they were part of. Didn't look like someone with money yesterday, did I? Didn't look like someone worth respect? You were right, Clarissa. Your bank doesn't serve beggars. I paused, letting that sink in. But apparently, it works for them. The color drained from her face completely. Mr. Patel looked like he was about to pass out, hyperventilate, or possibly both simultaneously. Derek was trying very hard not to laugh and failing miserably. I could see his shoulders shaking. Clarissa's face collapsed faster than a house of cards in a wind tunnel, faster than the stock market in 2008, faster than my faith in our marriage when I caught her texting Tanner at 3 a.m. with heart emojis. It was the kind of facial expression that transcends normal human emotion and enters the territory of existential crisis, where your entire understanding of reality just shatters and you're left trying to pick up pieces that don't fit together anymore. Her perfectly applied makeup suddenly looked like war paint on a losing soldier, and those designer heels she loved so much might as well have been cement blocks dragging her down into an abyss of her own making. Julian, wait. Her voice cracked, and I mean really cracked, like a teenage boy going through puberty kind of crack. She stood up so fast her chair rolled backward and hit the wall with a thud that made everyone jump. You can't do this. You can't just. This will ruin me. The branch, my position, everything I've worked for. You'll destroy it all. I looked at her calmly, like she was a stranger asking me for directions instead of my ex-wife, who was currently experiencing what I can only describe as a professional apocalypse. I'm not destroying anything, Clarissa. I'm simply moving my assets to an institution that values all its clients equally, regardless of how they dress or how much they're withdrawing on any given day. It's just business. Just business. She was practically shrieking now, and Mr. Patel looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and die. Just business? You're doing this because of yesterday. Because of what I said. What did you say yesterday? Mr. Patel asked, his voice barely above a whisper, like he already knew the answer was going to be bad, but needed to hear it anyway. The way you need to check your bank account, even though you know you're broke. Clarissa opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She looked like a fish, which was ironic because she was definitely drowning right now, just not in water. It was a misunderstanding. Julian came in to withdraw a small amount, and I made a joke. That's all. Just a joke. She called me a beggar, I said flatly, looking at Mr. Patel. In front of your entire lobby. Said you don't serve beggars here. I was trying to help my 74-year-old neighbor pay her heating bill so she wouldn't freeze to death, and your branch manager decided that was an appropriate time to publicly humiliate me based on my appearance. The sound Mr. Patel made was somewhere between a gasp and a groan, like someone had just kicked him in the stomach and then told him his house was on fire. He turned to Clarissa with an expression that could have melted steel. You said what? I didn't know. Clarissa was crying now, actual tears running down her face, ruining that expensive makeup she probably spent an hour applying this morning. How was I supposed to know? He looked like he was wearing sweatpants. He drives a Honda. He lives in a regular apartment. There was no indication that I interrupted, my voice still calm, still measured, still utterly in control while she spiraled into chaos. That I had money? That I deserved basic human respect? That I was worth treating with dignity? Which one of those things requires a certain net worth, Clarissa? She had no answer to that. Nobody did. The silence in that conference room was so absolute, so complete, that I could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead, could hear Mr. Patel's labored breathing, could hear Derek trying unsuccessfully to suppress what was definitely a snicker. Mr. Patel stood up slowly, like a man walking to his own execution, and turned to face Clarissa with the kind of expression that ends careers. "Mrs. Montgomery, you insulted a client. Not just any client. Apparently one of the largest clients our institution has ever had the privilege of serving. You discriminated against him based on his appearance, his choice of vehicle, and the amount he was withdrawing. You violated approximately 15 company policies that I can name off the top of my head, and probably another 20 that our legal department will gleefully point out in the next hour. Mr. Patel, please. Effective immediately, you're terminated." He said it with the finality of a judge delivering a sentence, and honestly, that's exactly what it was. Security will escort you from the building. You have 15 minutes to collect your personal belongings. Your access credentials will be deactivated, and you will receive a formal termination letter by end of business today detailing the reasons for your dismissal. Clarissa's legs seemed to give out, and she collapsed back into her chair like a puppet with cut strings. "You can't. This is unfair. I've been a model employee for 6 years. I've exceeded every target, brought in millions in new accounts. My performance reviews have been outstanding. And you threw all of that away," Mr. Patel said coldly, "the moment you decided that someone's worth as a human being was determined by their bank balance. In one interaction, you managed to cost this institution potentially billions of dollars and expose us to a discrimination lawsuit that our legal team is probably already having nightmares about." Right on cue, 2 security guards appeared at the door. They must have been called before we even got to the building. Mr. Patel was clearly a man who prepared for contingencies. They stood there awkwardly, trying to look professional while obviously being deeply uncomfortable with the whole situation. Because let's be real, nobody enjoys escorting a crying woman out of her workplace, even if she absolutely deserves it. Clarissa looked at me one last time, mascara running down her face, her confident boss babe persona completely shattered and scattered across the conference room floor like broken glass. "Julian, please. We were married. That has to count for something. You can't let them do this to me." And here's where I could have been magnanimous. I could have been the bigger person, could have said something about how I didn't want her fired, just wanted an apology, could have played the role of the gracious winner who shows mercy to the defeated opponent. But you know what? I looked at her sitting. By the time I got home, changed out of my billionaire costume and back into my natural habitat of sweatpants and a hoodie that had seen better days, probably in 2019, my phone was vibrating like it had developed a severe neurological condition. I'm talking constant buzzing, the kind that makes you think maybe you accidentally signed up for some kind of spam text service, except instead of offers for cheap car insurance, I was getting front row seats to the Montgomery family's complete and total meltdown. The first text came from Tiffany, Clarissa's sister, and the only member of that family who had functioning human emotions. "OMG, is it true you froze her bank?" 3 exclamation points and all caps. She was shook. I could picture her sitting somewhere, probably at her marketing job that she was definitely not doing at the moment, staring at her phone with her mouth hanging open like she'd just witnessed a UFO landing in her backyard. I texted back, didn't freeze anything, just moved my assets to a more respectful institution. Professional, calm, the kind of response that makes you sound reasonable even when you've just nuked someone's career from orbit. She replied within seconds, "Clarissa's having a complete breakdown. Mom's freaking out. Dad locked himself in his study. This is insane. Also, kind of iconic. Is that wrong to say?" I actually laughed at that. At least Tiffany had perspective. Not wrong. Accurate. Then came the call from Diana, Clarissa's mother, the woman who'd spent 6 years treating me like a disappointing houseplant that wouldn't die no matter how much she neglected it. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear what she'd say now that her daughter's life had imploded and I'd turned out to be exactly the opposite of what they'd all assumed. "Julian." Her voice was ice cold, the kind of cold that makes Antarctica look like a tropical vacation. "How could you humiliate her like this? In public? Getting her fired from her job? This is cruel, even for you, even for me. Like I had a history of cruelty, like I was known for going around destroying people's careers for fun. The audacity was actually impressive. Diana, I said, keeping my voice level because the high road is easier to navigate when you're sitting on a pile of money. I didn't get her fired. She got herself fired by calling a client a beggar. In public. I just happened to be that client, and I happened to be able to do something about it. You could have been the bigger person. You could have forgiven her. Instead, you went nuclear and destroyed her career out of spite. Publicly, I added helpfully. I destroyed her career publicly. You know, the same way she publicly humiliated me yesterday. The same way she publicly talked about how I was holding her back during our entire marriage. The same way she publicly celebrated leaving me like it was winning the lottery. But please, tell me more about being the bigger person. I'm all ears. She sputtered for a moment, trying to find words that would make me the villain in this story, but we both knew the narrative didn't work. Think of the family name. Think of what this means for us. I did think of the family name, I replied. That's why I didn't use it. I'm not a Montgomery anymore, remember? You all made that very clear during the divorce. I'm just Julian Hart, the nobody with the Honda and the computer thing, who apparently has enough money to make regional directors sweat through their Italian suits. This isn't over, Julian. We can fix this. Think of everything we meant to each other. Diana, we didn't mean anything to each other. You tolerated me because I was married to your daughter, and you barely managed that. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some really important nothing to do, which apparently is all I'm good for. I hung up before she could respond. It felt good, really good, like scratching an itch that had been bothering me for 6 years. Next came Richard, Clarissa's father, the man who'd looked through me like I was made of particularly uninteresting glass for the entire duration of my marriage to his daughter. His voice on the phone was different though, not angry like Diana's, but careful, calculated, like a businessman trying to negotiate a deal he knows he's already lost. Son, he started, which was rich considering he'd never called me that when I was actually his son-in-law. We can fix this. Think of the family name. Think of what this means for Clarissa's future. She's young. She made a mistake. She's 38, Richard. That's not young. That's old enough to know better. And it wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate cruelty based on her assumption that I was beneath her. Julian, be reasonable. One comment shouldn't destroy a woman's entire career. You're right, I interrupted. It shouldn't. But actions have consequences, Richard. You taught me that, remember? At that Thanksgiving dinner, when you spent 45 minutes explaining how people who don't take risks never succeed, how the world rewards those who are willing to be ruthless in business. Well, congratulations. Your daughter was ruthless. I'm just better at it. There was a long pause. What do you want? Money? An apology? Name your price. And there it was. The assumption that everything could be solved with money or negotiations, that every problem was just a transaction waiting to happen. I don't want anything from you, Richard. I wanted respect, maybe 6 years ago when I was part of your family. But I'm past that now. Way past it. Son, we can fix this. Think of. Don't worry, sir, I said, echoing the same formal tone I'd used when addressing him during family dinners when he'd barely acknowledged my existence. I did think of the family name. That's why I didn't use it. Wouldn't want to tarnish the Montgomery reputation by associating with a beggar. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then he hung up. Didn't say goodbye, didn't try to negotiate further, just hung up like a CEO ending a conference call that wasn't going his way. My phone kept buzzing. Text messages from people I hadn't heard from in years, mutual friends from the marriage, colleagues who'd connected with me on LinkedIn and then never interacted with my posts, random acquaintances who apparently had opinions about my life choices. Everyone had something to say, and it ranged from supportive, good for you, man. She had it coming, to judgmental, this seems excessive, don't you think? To just plain nosy, wait, you're a billionaire? How did that happen? I ignored most of them, turned my phone on Do Not Disturb, and made myself that cup of coffee I'd been promising myself all day. The good stuff, the beans I'd ordered online from a small roaster in Portland, who probably had no idea one of their customers could buy their entire company with pocket change. I ground them fresh, used my pour-over setup that Clarissa had always made fun of, just use a Keurig like a normal person, Julian, and watched the water slowly extract every bit of flavor from those beans while my phone continued its seizure on the counter. One text did catch my eye though, mainly because it came from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Hart, this is Amanda Rees from the New York Financial Times. I'm working on a story about Helix Capital and its mysterious founder, Jay Hale. Would you be available for comment? Oh, so it was starting. The media had caught wind of something interesting, and they were digging. This was inevitable, really. You can't threaten to pull $2 billion from a major financial institution without someone in that building talking to someone who knows someone who works at a newspaper. The banking world is gossipy as hell, despite all the NDAs and professional conduct policies. I deleted the message. Then I blocked the number. Then I made a mental note to call Derek later about implementing better privacy protocols, because apparently my quiet billionaire life was about to become significantly less quiet. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from Clarissa herself, sent from what was probably her personal account since her work email was definitely deactivated by now. The subject line read, "Please read this." I almost deleted it without opening it. Almost. But curiosity. That same curiosity that had gotten me into this mess by walking into her bank yesterday, made me click. Julian. It started, and I could practically hear her voice, shaky and desperate. I know you probably hate me right now, and I understand why. What I said yesterday was wrong. It was cruel and unprofessional, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But please, I'm begging you, don't do this. I've lost my job, my reputation is destroyed, and now my family is falling apart because of this. Tanner left me, said he couldn't be with someone who was this much of a liability. Everything I worked for is gone. Isn't that enough? Haven't I paid enough for one stupid comment? I read it twice, waiting to feel something. Sympathy maybe, or regret, or even satisfaction. But all I felt was tired. Tired of the drama, tired of being the villain in someone else's story, tired of having to justify standing up for myself. I closed the email without responding. She'd asked if she'd paid enough for one stupid comment, and honestly, that wasn't my problem to solve anymore. She'd made her choices, said her words, built her reputation on looking down at people she deemed beneath her. The consequences of that weren't my responsibility. I took my coffee to the window and looked out at the city, at all the people going about their lives completely unaware that somewhere in this urban sprawl, a minor drama was playing out that would make absolutely zero difference to any of them. They had their own problems, their own victories, their own stories. And me? I had my coffee, my sweatpants, and the satisfying knowledge that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe lets you be petty and righteous at the same time. My phone buzzed one more time. Another text from Tiffany. For what it's worth, I think you're handling this better than any of us would. Also, can you teach me about investing? Clearly, you know something we don't. I smiled and texted back. Step 1. Don't judge people by their Honda. Noted, she replied. Step 2. Make really good coffee and be patient. Everything else is just details. A week passed. 7 days of radio silence from the Montgomery family. 7 days of me living my regular life. Coding, managing my portfolio, visiting Mrs. Keller who insisted on baking me 3 different pies as repayment for the $250 even though I told her approximately 40 times that it wasn't necessary. 7 days of the story slowly fading from the immediate crisis zone into the remember when that happened category. The media had sniffed around for a day or two, but without confirmation of Jay Hale's real identity and without anyone willing to go on record about what actually happened, the story died like most financial gossip does, quietly and without resolution. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon while I was debugging some code that was being particularly stubborn, my phone rang. Clarissa. I stared at the screen for a moment, debating whether to answer or let it go to voicemail, where it could live with all the other attempts at communication I'd been ignoring. But something made me pick up. Maybe curiosity, maybe boredom, maybe just the sense that this story needed an actual ending instead of just trailing off into nothing. Julian. Her voice was different. Smaller. None of that confident boss babe energy. None of that superior tone that used to make me feel about 2 inches tall. She sounded defeated, and honestly, I didn't love that I could hear it so clearly. Please, can we talk? Just once. Face to face. We need closure. My family needs closure. I should have said no. Should have told her that we'd had our closure in that conference room when security escorted her out. Should have explained that closure isn't something you get to demand from people you've wronged. But you know what? I was curious. Curious about what she wanted to say. Curious about whether she'd actually learned anything. curious about whether her family had finally realized that the nobody they'd ignored for 6 years had been somebody all along. Fine, I said, but on my terms. I'll host dinner. Friday night, 7 p.m. You, your parents, and Tiffany if she wants to come. I'll text you the address. There was a pause. Dinner? At your place? Problem with that? No, I didn't think you'd want us in your home. Clarissa, if I wanted to keep being petty, I'd make you meet me at a McDonald's. This is me being civilized. Take it or leave it. We'll be there. Thank you, Julian. Really. I hung up and immediately called Derek, because obviously I needed a witness/moral support/someone to stop me if I decided to do something stupid like forgive her. You invited them to dinner? Derek's voice was incredulous, like I'd just told him I was planning to swim with sharks while wearing a suit made of tuna. Boss, that's either the most magnanimous thing you've ever done or the most sadistic. I can't tell which. Little bit of both, probably. Can you make it? Wouldn't miss it for the world. Should I bring popcorn? This feels like a popcorn event. Bring wine. Expensive wine. The kind that costs more than Richard's golf club membership. Now we're talking. Friday came faster than I expected, probably because I spent most of the week preparing for this dinner like it was a military operation. See, I'd moved since the divorce, hadn't told anyone, hadn't updated my address with people who didn't need to know, just quietly relocated to a penthouse that had views of the city skyline that made real estate agents weep with joy. It was the kind of place that screamed, I have money, without having to say a word. All floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture, and that particular kind of expensive simplicity that only rich people can pull off because everyone else just looks broke. I hired a private chef for the evening, a guy named Marcus who'd worked at 3 Michelin-star restaurants and could make food that tasted like art felt, if that makes sense. I told him to make something impressive but not pretentious, delicious but intimidating, the kind of meal that makes you realize you're out of your league. He grinned and said, I got you, boss. This is going to be fun. At 6:45 p.m., I was standing in my living room in dark slacks and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my old monthly rent, looking out at the city lights and wondering if I was making a huge mistake. Derek was already there, sitting on my couch with a glass of wine, looking absolutely delighted with the entire situation. You know this is insane, right? He said, swirling his wine like he was in a movie. Inviting your ex-wife and her family to your secret billionaire penthouse for dinner? This is some soap opera level drama. Yeah, well, I've always been dramatic. Just took everyone a while to notice. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 p.m., because of course the Montgomerys were punctual when it came to judging people's homes. I opened the door, and the look on their faces was worth every penny I'd spent on this place. Diana's mouth literally fell open. Richard froze mid-step, like someone had pressed pause on his entire existence. Clarissa's eyes went wide, then wider, then so wide I thought they might fall out of her head. Even Tiffany, who'd been relatively cool about this whole thing, let out a low whistle. Holy shit, Tiffany said, then immediately covered her mouth. Sorry, but seriously, holy shit. Come in, I said, stepping aside and gesturing to the interior that probably looked like something out of Architectural Digest because, fun fact, it had been featured in Architectural Digest last year under an anonymous owner profile. Make yourselves comfortable. They filed in slowly, like tourists in a museum, taking in the view, the furniture, the art on the walls that I'd bought mostly because Derek said it was a good investment and it looked nice. Richard walked straight to the windows, staring out at the skyline with an expression I couldn't quite read. Nice place, he muttered finally, which from Richard was basically a standing ovation. Must be expensive. It's paid for in cash, I replied, channeling every ounce of petty energy I had. Unlike your yacht, which I believe is still on a payment plan. His face went red. Tiffany snorted into her hand. Diana looked like she wanted to say something, but couldn't figure out what wouldn't sound completely hypocritical given the circumstances. We moved to the dining room, which Marcus had set up like we were hosting a state dinner. Clarissa sat down carefully, like the chair might disappear if she wasn't gentle with it, and I caught her looking around with this expression that was part amazement, part devastation, like she was calculating everything she'd given up when she left me. Dinner started civilized enough. Marcus had outdone himself with the first course, some kind of scallop situation that melted in your mouth and probably cost more per bite than a fast food value meal. Everyone ate in silence for a minute, which was awkward as hell, but also kind of perfect because I wanted them to sit with their assumptions, marinate in the reality that they'd been catastrophically wrong about me. Finally, Diana broke the silence. Julian, I think we owe you an apology. You think? I set down my fork and looked at her directly. That's interesting phrasing. Very noncommittal. I think is what you say when you're not sure if you left the oven on, not when you've spent 6 years treating someone like they're beneath you. That's not fair, she protested weakly. Fair? Diana, you introduced me to your friends as Clarissa's husband who has kind eyes, which is code for we can't think of anything impressive about him, so we're focusing on the fact that he's not actively threatening. You whispered about me like I was a charity case. You celebrated when Clarissa left me like she'd escaped from prison. Richard cleared his throat. We may have misjudged you. May have. Richard, you looked through me for 6 years like I was invisible. The only time you ever engaged with me directly was when you needed tech support, and even then, you acted like it was beneath you to ask. You gave me career advice, unsolicited, I might add, about how I should be more ambitious, more driven, more like the men you respected. Well, surprise. I was ambitious. I was driven. I just didn't need to perform it for your approval. Clarissa finally spoke up, her voice small. Julian, I'm sorry. For everything. For how I treated you. For what I said at the bank. For, her voice cracked. For not seeing who you really were. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine remorse. Not the performative kind. Not the, I'm sorry you're upset kind. But actual understanding that she'd messed up in a way that couldn't be fixed with an apology or a conversation or even a lifetime of regret. Clarissa, I said quietly, you saw exactly who I was. You just decided it wasn't enough. And that's fine. People are allowed to want more, to want different. But you didn't just leave. You spent 3 years making sure everyone knew that leaving me was an upgrade, that I was the problem, that I was holding you back from your potential. You turned our divorce into a publicity campaign for your success story. I know, she whispered. I know, and I'm sorry. Here's the thing, though. I continued, picking up my wine glass. The expensive wine Derek had brought that probably cost more than the dress Diana was wearing. I don't need your apology. I don't need your family's sudden respect. I don't need validation from people who only value me now that they know my net worth. I didn't need those things once, back when I thought your opinion mattered. But I'm past that now. I stood up, walked to my laptop sitting on the side table, and opened it. Pulled up some files I'd prepared specifically for this moment. Before we continue with dinner, I think you all should see something. I connected the laptop to the TV on the wall, and suddenly the screen was filled with documents, records, spreadsheets. Clarissa's employment history at Summit Trust, her expense reports, her authorization logs, and there, highlighted in yellow, were some very interesting transactions. Falsified staff bonuses, I said, pointing to the first set of documents. You reported giving bonuses to employees who never received them and pocketed the difference. Unauthorized expense claims. Fancy dinners with Tanner charged to the corporate account under client entertainment, except there were no clients. And my personal favorite, a personal loan to your boyfriend Tanner from corporate funds, unauthorized and undocumented, which technically counts as embezzlement. Richard's face went from red to white so fast I thought he might pass out. Diana put her hand to her mouth. Clarissa looked like she might throw up her scallops. Months later, Summit Trust quietly replaced its logo, trying to distance itself from the scandal. Clarissa disappeared from social media entirely, deleted her LinkedIn, her Instagram, all those carefully curated posts about success and ambition. Last I heard, she was working as a teller at a rural branch somewhere upstate, which felt like poetic justice served cold with a side of irony. Meanwhile, I kept living my life. Coding in sweatpants, managing billions, visiting Mrs. Keller every Tuesday for pie and conversation. She still insisted on paying me back that $250, and I still refused. Some debts aren't meant to be repaid. They're meant to remind us why kindness matters. One afternoon, while watering the small garden I'd started on my penthouse balcony, I realized something funny. The $4.2 billion wasn't my biggest withdrawal from that relationship. The real withdrawal was emotional. I'd finally pulled back my time, my energy, my peace from someone who never valued them. And the interest on that withdrawal? Pure, uncomplicated freedom. So yes, Clarissa, you were right about one thing. Your bank doesn't serve beggars. But I don't bank with clowns either. On our wedding anniversary, my wife turned to me in front of everyone, looked me straight in the eyes, and said, "I wish you had never been in my life." At that moment, I felt something break inside me. The next day, I didn't pretend nothing had happened. I sold the house, closed all the bank accounts, left everything behind without a trace, and quietly disappeared. Look, I've been through some pretty embarrassing situations in my life. There was that time in college when I accidentally called my professor mom during a thesis defense. There was the incident at my cousin's wedding where I caught the bouquet despite being a fully grown married man who wasn't even trying. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the atomic bomb of humiliation that Clara dropped on me at our 10th wedding anniversary dinner. You know what's worse than being dumped? Being dumped publicly, with witnesses, at an event you paid for, surrounded by people who are going to gossip about this for the next decade. It's like getting fired via company-wide email, except the company is your entire social circle and the severance package is just crippling embarrassment. So there we were at the Royal Moscow Grand Hotel. And let me tell you, this place was the kind of fancy that makes you nervous about touching anything. Crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than my first car hung from ceilings so high you'd need a stepladder just to change a light bulb. The champagne was flowing like we'd struck liquid gold, which, given the prices they were charging, we might as well have. Everyone was dressed to the nines, dripping in designer labels and expensive cologne that smelled like, I have more money than common sense. The women looked like they'd walked straight off a Paris runway, and the men looked like they owned the runway, the models, and probably the entire fashion district. My wife, Clara Ivanova, was standing there in this red silk dress that could stop traffic in 3 countries, looking like she'd been photoshopped by God himself. Her dark hair was swept up in some complicated style that probably required an engineering degree to achieve, and her makeup was so flawless she could have been a living Instagram filter. Me? I looked like a guy who thought showing up in a decent suit and remembering to trim his nose hair was the height of sophistication. I was proud of myself for matching my socks, honestly. The evening had been going smoothly enough, if you ignore the fact that Clara had barely looked at me all night and her mother, Veronica, kept shooting me these little smirks that made me feel like I was the punchline to a joke I hadn't heard yet. People were mingling, laughing at things that weren't funny because that's what you do at fancy parties when you're trying to impress people you secretly can't stand. The catering staff glided around like well-dressed ghosts, offering tiny portions of food that tasted amazing but left you hungrier than when you started. I'd already made my toast earlier in the evening, something safe and romantic about how Clara was my rock, my inspiration, blah blah blah, all the greatest hits you're supposed to say when you're trying to convince everyone your marriage is solid. People had clapped politely, someone had said, and I'd felt pretty good about myself. Mission accomplished, right? Wrong. So incredibly, devastatingly wrong. When Clara stood up and grabbed the microphone, I figured she was going to return the favor with something equally sweet. Maybe she'd talk about our journey together, our struggles and triumphs, how we built this life brick by brick. Maybe she'd mention that trip we took to Italy where I got food poisoning, but still insisted on seeing the Colosseum, because I'm a trooper like that. I was actually smiling, looking around at our guests with this dopey expression of contentment, probably looking like an idiot who didn't know he was about to get emotionally murdered in front of everyone he'd ever met. The room quieted down, everyone turning their attention to Clara, their faces expectant and warm. This was supposed to be the heartwarming moment where she professed her love and everyone got a little teary-eyed. Instead, she smiled at me, and I swear to God, it was the smile of a Bond villain who'd just activated their doomsday device. It was the smile of someone who'd been planning this moment for months, maybe years, and was finally getting to execute their masterpiece of destruction. "To my dear husband," she said, her voice clear and steady, projecting across the entire ballroom like she was accepting an Oscar for best performance in crushing someone's soul. "I wish you had never been in my life." The silence that followed was so profound you could have heard a pin drop from the bathroom 3 floors up. Someone gasped, loud enough that it echoed. A fork clattered onto a plate somewhere to my left, the sound like a gunshot in the frozen moment. A woman in the back made this little squeaking noise like a mouse that had just witnessed a murder. My brain, bless its stupid optimistic heart, refused to process what had just happened for a solid 5 seconds. It was like my neurons were saying, "Nope, we didn't hear that. Let's rewind and try again." But there was no rewinding. Clara was still standing there with that smile, that awful, beautiful, terrible smile, and everyone was staring at me like I'd just been diagnosed with a terminal case of public humiliation. My coping mechanism for emotional devastation, as it turns out, is apparently to become a stand-up comedian nobody asked for. I laughed, this weird, awkward sound that came out more like a bark than actual laughter, and said, "Oh, so no dessert then?" A few people made these uncomfortable chuckling noises, the kind of laugh you give when someone makes a joke at a funeral and you're not sure if it's appropriate to find it funny. Clara didn't laugh. She just kept staring at me with those ice-cold eyes, like she was watching a documentary about an extinct species and feeling absolutely nothing. Her mother, Veronica, who'd always treated me like I was something she'd scraped off her Louboutins, looked positively delighted. She was practically glowing with schadenfreude, her eyes sparkling like it was Christmas morning and I was the worst present anyone had ever received. My brother-in-law, Dmitri, raised his glass slightly and leaned over to whisper, "Rough night, huh?" "Yeah, thanks for that brilliant observation, Dmitri. Really appreciate the commentary from the peanut gallery during my public execution. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole, to transport me to another dimension where this hadn't just happened, where I was still the happy idiot who thought his marriage was solid. But the floor stayed stubbornly solid beneath my feet, and all those faces kept staring, some with pity, some with shock, and some, like Veronica, with barely concealed glee. Clara handed the microphone back to the MC, smoothed down her dress with this casual gesture like she'd just commented on the weather rather than nuked our entire relationship, and walked off the stage. She didn't look back. Not once. And somehow, that hurt more than the words themselves. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. Do I chase after her? Do I make another joke? Do I start crying right here in front of Moscow's elite and give them an even better story to tell at their next cocktail party? In the end, I did what any rational person would do in my situation. I grabbed my champagne glass, downed it in one gulp, and decided that tomorrow I'd figure out what to do with the rest of my suddenly very different life. Tonight, I was just going to stand here and marinate in the spectacular disaster that my 10th wedding anniversary had become. The penthouse felt different when I got back that night. It wasn't just cold, though the Moscow winter was doing its best impression of the Arctic tundra outside our floor-to-ceiling windows. No, this was a different kind of cold, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you realize that expensive heating systems can't do anything about the ice forming in your chest. The city lights twinkled below like a million little witnesses to my humiliation, each one probably occupied by someone who'd been at that dinner, already texting their friends about the spectacular public destruction of my marriage. I could practically hear the WhatsApp groups lighting up across Moscow. "OMG, did you see what Clara did to her husband?" Followed by a string of shocked face emojis and skull emojis and whatever other digital sympathy people offer when they're secretly thrilled they're not you. I stood in the doorway for a solid minute, just staring into our home, or what used to feel like our home. Now it looked like a museum exhibit titled The Before Times. What this idiot thought his life was. Everything was exactly where we'd left it this morning when we'd gotten ready for the anniversary dinner. Clara's coffee cup was still on the marble counter, lipstick stain on the rim like a little signature of normalcy. The throw pillows on the couch were arranged in that specific way she liked. The magazines on the coffee table fanned out at precise angles. It all looked so perfectly domestic, so dishonestly peaceful. I half expected a voiceover to start narrating my life like I was in some tragic Russian novel, which, let's be honest, I basically was at this point. All I needed was some snow and a philosophical crisis, and boom, I could be in a Dostoevsky adaptation. Clara didn't come home that night. I kept checking my phone like some pathetic teenager waiting for their crush to text back, watching the screen light up with notifications that were definitely not from my wife. My mom called, bless her heart, probably because someone had already informed her that her son had been verbally demolished in front of half of Moscow's social elite. I didn't answer. What was I going to say? Hey mom. Yeah, turns out my marriage was a lie and I'm an idiot. How was your Tuesday? I got a text from my buddy Victor asking if I was okay, which I ignored because the answer was obviously no, and I wasn't in the mood to state the obvious. There were a few missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, probably journalists or gossipy acquaintances looking for the inside scoop, like I was going to give interviews about my own destruction. I checked the fridge because that's what you do when your life falls apart. You look for comfort in refrigerated goods. Spoiler alert, we had nothing. Some fancy cheese that probably cost more than a car payment, half a bottle of white wine that Clara liked and I tolerated, and a container of leftovers, something that I couldn't identify and honestly didn't want to. Perfect. My wife had just publicly wished I'd never existed, and I didn't even have proper breakup ice cream to eat my feelings with. I grabbed the wine bottle, didn't bother with a glass because I was well past the point of pretending I had any dignity left, and went to sit on the couch. Our couch. The one we'd picked out together 3 years ago after spending an entire Saturday arguing about whether gray or beige was more timeless. We'd gone with gray. Clara had one, like she always did. Looking at it now, I couldn't remember why I'd cared so much about beige. The apartment was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat, which was annoying because I'd rather not be reminded that my body was continuing to function despite the fact that my entire world had just imploded. I lay down on that expensive gray couch, staring up at the ceiling that we'd had repainted last spring in something called Whisper White, which apparently was different from regular white in ways that cost an extra 3,000 rubles. The ceiling stared back at me, blank and unhelpful, offering no answers to the questions spinning through my head like a demented carousel. Why? How long had she been planning this? Was this some elaborate prank that I was too stupid to understand? Maybe hidden cameras were going to pop out and she'd laugh and say gotcha. And we'd all have a good laugh about the time she pretended to nuke our marriage for entertainment purposes. But the cameras never appeared, and Clara never came home, and I was left lying there like some tragic protagonist in a movie nobody wanted to watch. Her words kept replaying in my head on an endless loop, like the world's worst song that you can't get out of your brain no matter how hard you try. I wish you had never been in my life. Not, I want a divorce. Not, I'm unhappy. Not even, I've met someone else. Just a complete erasure of our entire decade together, reduced to a single wish that I'd never existed in her world at all. It was almost impressive in its cruelty, like she'd workshopped different options and decided that total negation was the most effective knife to twist. I couldn't help but wonder if she'd practiced that line in the mirror, testing different deliveries until she found the one that would cause maximum damage. I laughed then, lying there in the dark with an empty wine bottle on my chest, and it came out bitter and sharp like broken glass. You and me both, sweetheart, I said to the empty apartment, to the designer furniture and the expensive art on the walls and the life we'd built that apparently meant nothing. My voice echoed slightly in the silence, and even I could hear how pathetic I sounded, talking to myself like some unhinged hermit who'd forgotten how human interaction worked. But there was nobody else to talk to, and the alternative was sitting in complete silence with my thoughts, which seemed significantly worse. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke up with my neck at an angle that would require a chiropractor and possibly divine intervention to fix. The early morning light was filtering through the windows, gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. For about 3 beautiful seconds, I didn't remember what had happened. Then it all came rushing back like a highlight reel of my worst moments, and I groaned loud enough to disturb the neighbors. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, which seemed like a lot until I realized that most of them were probably from people I hadn't talked to in years who suddenly remembered I existed now that I was a walking disaster. Nothing from Clara, though. Not a single word. No apology, no explanation, no sorry I publicly destroyed you last night, my bad. Just silence. I dragged myself off the couch and caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. I looked like I'd been hit by a truck driven by disappointment and fueled by betrayal. My hair was sticking up in directions that defied physics, my suit was wrinkled beyond recognition, and my eyes had this hollow quality that suggested I'd seen things no man should see. Which, fair, I kind of had. I looked like my own before picture in one of those transformation stories, except there was no after picture yet. Just more, before stretching out indefinitely into a future I hadn't planned for and didn't want. Something shifted in me then, standing there looking at my own wrecked reflection. It wasn't quite anger yet, and it wasn't really sadness anymore either. It was something colder, calmer, more dangerous. It was the feeling you get when you realize that the person you thought you knew never actually existed, and the life you thought you had was just a performance you'd been too blind to see through. It was clarity, sharp and painful and absolutely certain. By the time the sun had fully risen over Moscow, painting everything in shades of gold that felt insulting given my circumstances, my heartbreak had transformed into something else entirely. The kind of calm that only comes before people do something dramatic. The kind of calm that meant tomorrow was going to look very different from yesterday. I walked to the window and looked out at the city that had witnessed my humiliation, and I made a decision. If Clara wanted me out of her life, fine. I'd grant her wish. But I'd do it on my terms, in my way, and when I was done, she'd realize that some wishes come with consequences you didn't see coming. But first, I needed coffee and a plan, probably in that order. First thing in the morning, after I'd showered away the physical evidence of my emotional breakdown and put on a fresh suit, because even in crisis I apparently still cared about looking presentable, I called our lawyer. Mikhail Petrov had been handling our affairs for the past 6 years, ever since we'd bought the penthouse and needed someone to navigate the nightmare of Russian property law. He was one of those guys who looked like he'd been born in a gray suit, emerged from the womb already wearing reading glasses and carrying a briefcase full of disappointment. His office was downtown, in one of those buildings that screamed, "We charge by the minute and you can't afford us." All marble floors and original art that probably cost more than most people's kidneys on the black market. I didn't make an appointment because honestly, appointments felt like something people with stable lives did, and I was currently operating in crisis mode where normal rules didn't apply. I just showed up at 9 in the morning, probably looking like a man who'd spent the night wrestling with existential dread and losing, and told his assistant that I needed to see Mikhail immediately. She took one look at my face and must have decided that whatever was happening was above her pay grade, because she ushered me right in without the usual, "Let me check his schedule" dance. Mikhail was sitting behind his enormous desk that was probably made from the dreams of defeated clients, looking over some documents with that expression lawyers get when they're reading something that's going to cost someone a lot of money. He glanced up when I walked in, and I watched his professional mask slip for just a second as he registered my appearance. I must have looked worse than I thought. "Good morning," he said carefully, like he was talking to someone who might be armed or emotionally unstable, which, fair assessment. "This is unexpected. Is everything all right?" What a question. Was everything all right? "Oh sure, Mikhail, everything's peachy. My wife just publicly wished me out of existence in front of everyone we know, but other than that, living the dream." I sat down in one of his leather chairs that probably cost more than my first car and got straight to the point because I didn't have time for pleasantries or small talk or pretending that this was a social visit. "Mikhail," I said, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt, which was a minor miracle. "I want to sell everything." He blinked at me, which was probably the most emotion I'd ever seen from him. Lawyers like Mikhail didn't do surprise very often. They'd trained themselves out of human reaction somewhere during law school, but I'd apparently managed to crack through his professional exterior. He set down his pen with deliberate care, folded his hands on the desk like he was about to deliver bad news to a terminal patient, and said, "Everything, sir? Could you be more specific?" "Everything," I repeated, because apparently he needed me to spell it out. "The penthouse, both cars, the vacation house in Sochi that we used exactly twice in 3 years, that boat Clara insisted we needed even though neither of us can sail, the art collection, the furniture, that ridiculous espresso machine that cost more than a motorcycle. All of it. I want it sold, liquidated, turned into cash that I can actually do something with." I was on a roll now, the words coming faster as the plan solidified in my head. "Oh, and that overpriced blender she bought from some Italian designer that we never used because it was too beautiful to actually blend things with. Sell that too. Sell everything that isn't nailed down. And if it is nailed down, get a crowbar." Mikhail's expression had progressed from surprise to concerned, like he was watching someone have a breakdown in real time and trying to figure out if he should call security or a psychiatrist. "Sir," he said slowly, using that tone people use when they're trying to talk someone off a ledge, "are you sure about this? That's your entire life. Your assets, your home, your investments. You've spent years building this portfolio. He gestured vaguely at the folder on his desk that probably contained details about every expensive decision Clara and I had made over the past decade. If this is about a marital dispute, perhaps we should discuss more measured approaches. Mediation, counseling, a temporary separation. It's not a dispute, Mikhail, I interrupted, and I couldn't help but laugh because calling what happened at that dinner a dispute was like calling the Titanic a boat accident. A dispute is when you disagree about where to go for dinner. This is something else entirely. And yes, I'm absolutely sure. In fact, I've never been more sure of anything in my life, which is saying something because I once convinced myself that investing in a friend's cryptocurrency venture was a good idea. That had lost me about 50,000 rubles before I'd learned my lesson about trusting people who used the word blockchain more than 3 times in a sentence. He studied me for a long moment, probably running through his mental database of divorce cases and trying to figure out where mine fell on the scale of amicable split to complete catastrophe. Eventually, he sighed, pulled out a fresh legal pad, and clicked his pen with the resignation of someone who knew they were about to have a very long day. All right, he said, let's start with the property. The penthouse is in both your names, correct? And just like that, we were off to the races. For the next 3 hours, Mikhail walked me through the process of dismantling a life. We discussed market values and tax implications and the best strategies for liquidating assets quickly without losing too much money in the process. Apparently, when you're in a hurry to sell everything you own, people sense desperation like sharks sense blood, and they'll lowball you accordingly. But I didn't care. I wasn't doing this for maximum profit. I was doing it for maximum freedom. By noon, I'd signed more papers than I thought existed in the world. My hand was cramping from all the signatures, and I developed a newfound respect for people whose job involved paperwork because this was exhausting. Each signature felt like closing a door on the past, sealing off another piece of the life I'd thought I had. Sign here to sell the penthouse where we'd hosted dinner parties and argued about throw pillows. Sign here to liquidate the investment account we'd opened when we'd still believed in joint futures. Sign here to dissolve the vacation property where we'd spent exactly 4 days before realizing that Sochi in winter was basically just expensive misery with a beach view. What about the joint accounts? Mikhail asked, flipping through his notes. Right, the joint accounts. The ones where our money mingled together like our lives were actually intertwined. Shut them down, I said. Transfer my half to my personal account. Actually, no, not my personal account. I'd had an idea percolating in the back of my mind, something I'd set up years ago on the advice of a paranoid business partner who'd insisted that everyone should have a backup plan. I have an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. I set it up 5 years ago and honestly forgot about it until right now. Transfer everything there. Mikhail's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline, which was the most animated I'd ever seen him. You have an offshore account? He sounded almost impressed, like I'd just revealed I was secretly a spy or an international man of mystery instead of just a guy who'd listened to one too many podcasts about financial security. Why? I shrugged. Paranoia, mostly. My business partner, Alexei, convinced me it was smart to have funds somewhere that couldn't be easily accessed or frozen in case of emergencies. He was always going on about protecting assets and having contingency plans. At the time, I thought he was being ridiculous. Now I'm thinking maybe Alexei was a genius and I should have listened to more of his conspiracy theories. Well, Mikhail said, making a note. In this case, his paranoia is serving you well. I'll have the transfers initiated by end of business today. He looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, there was something almost human in his expression. Not quite sympathy, but maybe understanding. What about personal belongings? Clothes, items of sentimental value. I'd already thought about that. Last night, in between staring at the ceiling and contemplating the meaninglessness of existence, I'd mentally cataloged what actually mattered to me. Turns out, not much. 1 suitcase, I told him. I'm packing 1 suitcase. Some jeans, sneakers, practical stuff. My grandfather's watch, the one he gave me before he died. And a photo of my dog, Max, from when I was a kid. Max had been a golden retriever with the IQ of a brick and the loyalty of a saint. He'd loved me unconditionally for 12 years without ever questioning whether I deserved it or wondering if he could do better. That dog had shown me more genuine affection than my wife of 10 years. Funny how that worked out. That's it. Mikhail asked. That's it, I confirmed. Everything else is just stuff. Expensive stuff? Sure, but it's not mine anymore. It belongs to a life I'm not living. He nodded slowly and made another note. And where will you go? That was the million-ruble question, wasn't it? Where does someone go when they've just torched their entire existence? I smiled, and it felt genuine for the first time in 24 hours. Somewhere she'll never think to look. Somewhere I can figure out what the hell happens next. As I left Mikhail's office that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't know was there until I set it down. St. Petersburg wasn't my first choice for disappearing. If I'm being honest, it wasn't even my second or third choice. But there's something poetic about going back to the place where it all started, like a detective returning to the crime scene, except the crime was falling in love, and the victim was my own stupid heart. Clara and I had met here 12 years ago at some art gallery opening that I'd only attended because my buddy Sergey had dragged me there, promising free wine and culture. I'd found the wine, at least. And I'd found Clara, standing in front of some abstract painting that looked like someone had sneezed colors onto a canvas, and she'd turned to me and asked what I thought it meant. I'd said it looked like a visual representation of a hangover, and she'd laughed, and that was it. Game over. I was hooked like a fish who didn't know the bait was poisoned. Now here I was, 12 years and one nuclear divorce later, stepping off a train at Moskovsky railway station with one suitcase and a plan that was about 60% spite and 40% survival instinct. The city looked different in winter, or maybe I looked different, or maybe everything looks different when you're viewing it through the lens of complete emotional destruction. The snow was falling in that picturesque way that makes tourists take photos and locals curse, blanketing everything in white like the world was trying to start fresh. I wished it was that easy, just cover everything with snow and pretend the mess underneath didn't exist. I'd found an apartment online, one of those places that doesn't ask too many questions as long as you pay in cash and don't throw wild parties or commit any obvious felonies. It was in a neighborhood that estate agents would generously call up and coming, and everyone else would call sketchy but affordable. The building looked like it had been constructed during the Soviet era by people who believed that buildings should be functional and aesthetically pleasing was bourgeois nonsense. Gray concrete, small windows, a stairwell that smelled like cabbage and regret. It was perfect. The landlord was a woman named Olga who looked like she'd seen every kind of human disaster and wasn't impressed by any of them. She had that particular Russian grandmother energy that suggested she could probably kill you with her bare hands if properly motivated, but would rather just collect her rent and ignore you. "You're Leonid Karpov?" she asked, squinting at me through the crack in her door like I might be there to rob her or sell her encyclopedias. That was my new name, the one I'd paid a questionable amount of money to a guy Mikhail knew who specialized in helping people become other people. Leonid Karpov. It sounded like a character from a Cold War spy novel, which I guess was fitting because I was kind of living in one now. "That's me," I confirmed, holding up the envelope of cash like it was a peace offering. Money talks in any language, and Olga's eyes brightened when she saw it. She opened the door wider, revealing an apartment that was about the size of my former walk-in closet and had roughly the same amount of natural light. "First and last month, plus deposit," she said, counting the bills with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. No loud music after 10. No guests who stay longer than 3 days. No funny business. I wasn't entirely sure what constituted funny business in Olga's world, but I assured her that I was the least funny person on the planet right now, and she seemed satisfied with that answer. She handed me a key that looked like it predated the Russian Revolution and left me alone with my new life, which currently consisted of one suitcase, one apartment that smelled like old cigarettes and somebody else's memories, and absolutely no idea what I was doing. The first thing I did was change my appearance because apparently I was committing to this whole reinvention thing. I'd always been clean-shaven, the kind of guy who went to a barber every 2 weeks and paid too much for a simple haircut because Clara liked it that way. My hair had been professionally styled, kept at a length that she approved of, colored to hide the gray that was starting to creep in at my temples. Looking at myself in the bathroom mirror of my new apartment, under the fluorescent light that made everything look like a crime scene, I barely recognized the person staring back at me. Good. That was the point. I went to a pharmacy and bought box dye, the cheap kind that comes with instructions in 3 languages and warnings about possible allergic reactions. The woman at the counter looked at my natural dark brown hair and then at the box I'd chosen, which was labeled Midnight Black, and raised an eyebrow. You sure? She asked in that tone that suggested I was making a mistake, but it was my mistake to make. Positive, I told her, because nothing says new identity like committing to a hair color that would be a nightmare to grow out. I also grabbed a razor, some shaving cream, and on impulse, a pair of reading glasses with clear lenses because apparently I was method acting my way into becoming someone else. Back at the apartment, I spent the next hour transforming myself in a bathroom that was barely big enough to turn around in. The hair dye smelled like chemicals and broken dreams, and I had to leave it on for 30 minutes while contemplating my life choices. When I finally rinsed it out, my hair was black as midnight like the box had promised, which made me look either mysterious or like I was going through a midlife crisis. Probably both. Then came the beard. I'd had facial hair on and off over the years, but Clara had always preferred me clean-shaven, said it made me look more professional. Professional for what? I'd never asked. Now I took the razor and got rid of the stubble I'd been growing since the anniversary dinner, shaving my face smooth and then staring at this stranger in the mirror. Dark hair, clean-shaven, the cheap reading glasses perched on my nose. I looked like a completely different person. I looked like Leonid Karpov, whoever the hell that was. Some guy who lived in a tiny apartment in St. Petersburg and definitely wasn't a heartbroken idiot from Moscow whose wife had publicly eviscerated him. I practiced introducing myself to the mirror, which felt ridiculous but seemed necessary. Hi, I'm Leonid. Leo. I'm a translator. That last part wasn't actually a lie. I was fluent in English, French, and German thanks to an expensive international education and a semester abroad that my parents had insisted would broaden my horizons. Turns out those languages were about to save my ass because I needed money and translating was something I could do from anywhere without anyone asking too many questions about my past. I set myself up with a laptop I'd bought with cash from some electronics store that looked one inspection away from being shut down. Created new email addresses, new social media profiles with my new name, and a photo where my face was just blurry enough to be useless for identification. Started browsing freelance translation websites, the kind where businesses posted jobs and desperate freelancers bid against each other in a race to the bottom. It wasn't glamorous work. I was translating user manuals for kitchen appliances and terms of service agreements that nobody would ever read, but it paid enough to cover rent and food and the occasional bottle of vodka for when the existential dread got too loud. By day, I was Leonid the translator, sitting in my tiny apartment with my laptop, converting technical German into passable English and trying not to think about how far I'd fallen. By night, though, that's when the real me came out. That's when I'd pull up Clara's social media on a burner phone I'd bought specifically for stalking my ex-wife, because apparently healthy coping mechanisms weren't my strong suit. Instagram, Facebook, even that weird Russian social network that I'd never understood the point of. She was everywhere, smiling in every photo, living her best life without me. She'd changed her relationship status to single within 48 hours of that dinner, which seemed efficient if nothing else. The photos were what killed me though. Clara at fancy restaurants with people I recognized from our old life, holding cocktails and laughing at jokes I couldn't hear. Clara at a spa day with her friends, face masks and champagne, looking relaxed in a way I'd never seen when we were together. Clara at what looked like a gallery opening, wearing that black dress I'd always loved, standing next to people in suits who probably had more money than God. And in every single photo, every single one, I wasn't there. It was like I'd been photoshopped out of her life, erased so completely that you'd never know I'd existed at all. Not one picture from our 10 years together, not one throwback post with a caption about moving forward. Just nothing. Radio silence. Complete erasure. I scrolled through months of her life, torturing myself with evidence of her happiness, and that's when I started noticing something. There was a guy who appeared in multiple photos, always sort of in the background, but increasingly present. Tall, probably 6'2" or 6'3", with that kind of effortless style that suggested he'd been born knowing how to tie a tie and order wine. Dark hair slicked back, designer stubble that probably required more maintenance than my entire grooming routine. In the first few photos, he was just there, another face in the crowd. But as I scrolled forward in time, he got closer to Clara, standing next to her, touching her arm, whispering something in her ear that made her laugh. And then there was a photo from just last week, Clara and this mystery man at some charity gala, and his hand was on the small of her back in a way that was definitely not platonic. I zoomed in on his face, screenshotted it, and started doing what any rational person in my position would do: obsessive internet stalking. Reverse image search, social media deep dives, the whole stalker starter pack. Took me about an hour, but I found him. Roman Delionov, business partner at Clara's company. 38 years old, graduated from some fancy business school in London, drove a car that cost more than most people's houses. His Instagram was private, but his Facebook was public, and oh look, there he was with Clara at a business conference from 6 months ago. 6 months ago. When we were still married. When I was still under the delusion that my wife loved me. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down, staring at the water-stained ceiling of my apartment and processing this new information. Obsessively scrolling through your ex-wife's social media at 3 in the morning is one thing, but if you really want to know what someone's up to, you need professional help. Not the therapy kind, though I probably needed that too. I'm talking about the kind of help that comes with a trench coat, a smoking habit, and questionable ethics. I needed a private investigator, and not just any private investigator. I needed someone who operated in that gray area between legal and, let's not talk about how I got this information. Mikhail had given me a name before I left Moscow, scrawled on a piece of paper like we were in a spy movie. Ivan Smirnov. The way Mikhail had said it, with this mix of respect and fear, told me everything I needed to know. This was a guy who got results and didn't ask permission. Finding Ivan wasn't difficult. Guys like him don't exactly hide. They operate in plain sight, tucked away in offices above Chinese restaurants or convenience stores, places where the rent is cheap and nobody pays attention to who's coming and going. His office was in a building near the Fontanka River that looked like it had survived both world wars and several renovation attempts, none of them successful. The directory in the lobby was one of those old boards with plastic letters that you slide into slots, half of them missing or replaced with numbers that didn't match. 3rd floor, suite 3B. No name, just a number. Perfect. I climbed the stairs because the elevator had an out-of-order sign that looked like it had been there since the Cold War, and honestly, I didn't trust Soviet-era machinery with my life, even on a good day. The stairwell smelled like cigarettes and decisions people regretted, which seemed appropriate. When I found Suite 3B, the door was unmarked except for a small brass plaque that said, "Consultations by appointment only." I knocked anyway because I'd learned that appointment only usually meant, I'm probably here, but want to seem more important than I am. The door opened after about 30 seconds, revealing a man who looked exactly like you'd imagine a Russian private investigator would look if central casting was being really obvious. About it. Mid-50s, maybe older, with gray hair cut military short and eyes that had seen too much and remembered all of it. He was wearing a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, slacks that had seen better days, and an expression that suggested I was interrupting something important, which I probably was. A cigarette dangled from his lips like it had been surgically attached there, and the office behind him was thick with smoke despite the window being cracked open. Ivan Smirnov. I asked, though I knew it was him. Who else would it be? He looked me up and down with the kind of assessment that made me feel like he'd already read my entire life story and found it moderately disappointing. Depends on who's asking, he said in a voice that sounded like he gargled gravel for fun. Classic detective answer. Mysterious, non-committal, probably practiced in the mirror. Mikhail Petrov sent me, I said, and that was apparently the magic password because his expression shifted from suspicious to merely cautious. He stepped aside and gestured for me to come in, which I did, trying not to cough as I entered what had to be the smokiest room in all of St. Petersburg. The office was exactly what you'd expect. Cluttered desk covered in files and coffee cups, a wall of filing cabinets that probably contained enough dirt on people to blackmail half the city, a laptop that looked like it had been manufactured during the Bronze Age, and photographs tacked to a corkboard with red string connecting them, like some conspiracy theorist's fever dream. There was a worn leather couch against one wall that I suspected doubled as a bed on nights when Ivan didn't feel like going home, and a mini fridge in the corner that I'd bet money only contained beer and possibly some questionable takeout. He gestured to one of the chairs across from his desk, and I sat down, grateful that it at least seemed structurally sound. So, Ivan said, settling into his own chair with the ease of someone who'd spent approximately 10,000 hours sitting in that exact spot. Mikhail doesn't send people to me unless they're in trouble or about to cause trouble. Which one are you? I appreciated his directness. No small talk, no pretense, just straight to the point. Little bit of both, I admitted, and pulled out the envelope I'd prepared. Inside was 5,000 rubles in cash, which was probably either too much or not enough. I honestly had no idea what the going rate for private investigation was. I just grabbed what felt like a serious amount of money without being insultingly small. Ivan took the envelope, counted the bills with practiced efficiency, and nodded once like I'd passed some kind of test. All right, he said, stubbing out his cigarette in an ashtray that was already overflowing with the corpses of its predecessors. What do you need? I slid my phone across the desk, showing him the photo I'd found of Clara and Roman at that gala. My wife? I said, then corrected myself because apparently my brain hadn't caught up with reality yet. My ex-wife. Clara Ivanova. I need to know everything about her relationship with this man. Roman Delyanov. How long it's been going on, where they meet, what they're planning. Everything. Ivan picked up the phone, studied the photo for a long moment, and I watched something flicker across his face. Recognition, maybe. Or just the calculation of a man figuring out how complicated this job was going to be. Clara Ivanova. He repeated slowly and let out a low whistle. The Clara Ivanova? Real estate mogul? The one who's always in those society magazines wearing clothes that cost more than my car. I nodded, and he leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously under his weight. You've got expensive taste in ex-wives, my friend. Had, I corrected. Past tense. And trust me, the cost wasn't worth the return on investment. He almost smiled at that, just a slight twitch at the corner of his mouth that suggested he'd heard similar sentiments from 100 other clients with expensive relationship problems. And Roman Delyanov, he continued, pulling out a notebook that looked like it had survived a war, her business partner. I know of him. Slick guy? Drives a Porsche. Shows up at all the right parties with all the right people. He lit another cigarette, and I was starting to understand why the window was open despite it being winter. You think they're having an affair? I know they are, I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. A few weeks ago, saying those words out loud would have destroyed me. Now they just felt like facts, like saying the sky is blue or Moscow traffic is terrible. What I need to know is how long it's been going on and what else they might be up to. Because see, here's the thing. I leaned forward, and Ivan mirrored the gesture, suddenly very interested. My wife, sorry, ex-wife, she didn't just leave me. She humiliated me. Publicly. At our anniversary dinner in front of everyone we know. That's not normal divorce behavior. That's someone who wanted to destroy me, who wanted to make sure I was completely ruined before she moved on. And you think there's more to it? Ivan said, not a question but a statement. He got it. He understood that people don't usually go nuclear unless they're covering something up or protecting something. I know there's more to it, I replied. I can feel it. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, call it whatever you want. But Clara is a planner. She doesn't do anything without a reason, and she definitely doesn't burn bridges unless she's absolutely certain she'll never need them again. Which means she's got something lined up, something that made her confident enough to completely obliterate our marriage without a second thought. Ivan was nodding now, scribbling notes in his terrible handwriting that probably only he could decipher. All right, he said after a moment. I'll look into it. But I need to be clear about something. He fixed me with a stare that made me feel like I was being interrogated by the KGB. Men like me, we don't ask questions about why you want this information. We don't judge, we don't counsel, we just find facts and deliver them. But we also don't get involved in anything illegal. I'll follow them, I'll photograph them, I'll find out what they're doing and who they're doing it with. But if you're planning something that crosses lines, that's on you, not me. Understood, understood, I assured him, though privately I wasn't entirely sure what I was planning. Revenge? Justice? Just the satisfaction of knowing I was right? Probably all three mixed together with a heavy dose of spite. I'm not looking to do anything crazy. I just need to know the truth. The whole truth, not the sanitized version Clara would tell me. Ivan seemed satisfied with that answer. Give me 2 weeks, he said, standing up to shake my hand. His grip was firm, the handshake of someone who'd learned that in a different era when handshakes actually meant something. I'll tail them, see what I can find. Don't call me. I'll call you. And for God's sake, don't do anything stupid in the meantime. Don't confront her, don't show up at her place, don't send threatening messages. You want this done right. You need to be patient and smart. 2 weeks felt like an eternity, but I agreed because what choice did I have? I left Ivan's office feeling like I'd just hired a hitman, except instead of killing someone, he was going to kill my illusions about my marriage, which honestly might hurt more. The next 14 days were torture. I threw myself into translation work, spending 12-hour days converting boring corporate documents from one language to another, trying not to think about what Ivan was discovering. I started running, which I'd never done before, just putting on cheap sneakers and pounding the pavement along the Neva River until my lungs burned and my legs screamed. Physical pain was easier to deal with than emotional pain, and at least when you're running, you can pretend you're running towards something instead of away from everything. Ivan called on day 15, his voice crackling through the burner phone I'd given him the number for. "We need to meet," was all he said, and the tone told me he'd found something. Something big. We met at the same cafe where we'd first talked, a place called Cafe Pushkin that was trying very hard to be literary and artistic, but mostly just served overpriced coffee to tourists and locals who should know better. Ivan was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a folder in front of him and that same cigarette holder expression that seemed to be his default. I sat down across from him, my heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the running I'd been doing. Ivan slid the folder across the table like he was passing classified documents in a Cold War exchange, except instead of state secrets, it contained photographic evidence of my wife's betrayal. Ex-wife. I really needed to get that correction tattooed on my brain. The folder was thick, which seemed like a bad sign. In my experience, nothing good ever came in thick folders. Thick folders meant complications, meant layers of problems you hadn't anticipated, meant your life was about to get significantly more interesting in the worst possible way. I opened it slowly, half afraid of what I'd find, and the first thing I saw was a photo of Clara and Roman at what looked like a hotel entrance. The Astoria, if I wasn't mistaken, which was one of those places that charged more for a night than most people made in a month. They were laughing, his arm around her waist, and she was looking up at him with an expression I recognized because she used to look at me that way. Used to. Past tense. Everything about my marriage was past tense now. They've been meeting there every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 6 months, Ivan said, his voice flat and professional, like he was reading a weather report instead of documenting the systematic destruction of my marriage. Always the same room. Presidential suite. They check in separately, leave separately, but the hotel staff confirmed they're together. I talked to a maid who was very chatty after I bought her lunch and showed appropriate interest in her opinions about the guests. He lit another cigarette, and I was starting to think the man ran on nicotine and cynicism. They're not subtle about it. Ordering room service, champagne, the works. Your wife has expensive taste in affairs. Yeah, well, she had expensive taste in everything. I muttered, flipping through more photos. There they were at restaurants I recognized, places Clara and I used to go. That felt particularly cruel, like she was rewriting our history with Roman in my place. There were photos of them at what looked like business meetings, except the body language was way too intimate for business. His hand on her knee under the table, her leaning in close to whisper something. The kind of casual touching that only happens when people are very comfortable with each other. 6 months. I repeated, doing the math in my head. So this started while we were still very much married. While I was planning our anniversary dinner like an idiot. It gets better, Ivan said, and his tone suggested it absolutely did not get better. He pulled out another set of photos, these ones taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. Clara and Roman at what looked like a construction site, examining blueprints with a group of men in hard hats. I followed them to this development project on the outskirts of Moscow. Big money, lots of investors. They're working on some luxury apartment complex that's supposed to be the next hot property for rich people with more money than sense. He tapped one of the photos where a man in an expensive suit was shaking hands with Roman. That's Dmitry Volkov. Know him? I squinted at the photo. The name sounded vaguely familiar, the kind of name you hear at parties when people are trying to impress each other with their connections. Should I? Ivan leaned back, and the chair creaked in protest. Volkov is connected. And when I say connected, I mean the kind of connections that make people nervous. Money laundering, fraud, possibly some light weapons trading on the side. Nothing proven, Of course, because guys like him are very good at keeping their hands clean. But he's been on the authorities' radar for years. That got my attention. I set down my coffee cup, which I'd been holding more for something to do with my hands than because I actually wanted to drink from it. The coffee was terrible anyway, burnt and bitter, matching my mood perfectly. You're telling me Clara and Roman are doing business with a criminal? Ivan shrugged. I'm telling you they're doing business with a guy who associates with criminals. Could be they don't know. Could be they do know and don't care. Could be they're actively involved in whatever shady stuff he's up to. That's what you hire me to find out, right? Well, I'm finding out, and it's messy. He pulled out more documents from the folder, photocopies of what looked like financial records. I've got a guy who works in property registration. He owes me favors from way back. These are records of shell companies, money moving through accounts registered in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands. Your wife's name shows up. So does Roman's. So does Volkov's. They're moving a lot of money around, and not in ways that suggest everything is above board. I stared at the numbers, feeling my anger shift into something colder and more calculating. This wasn't just an affair. This was bigger. Clara hadn't just cheated on me emotionally. She'd possibly been using our marriage as cover for whatever financial crimes she was committing with her lover and their shady business partner. There's more, Ivan said, because apparently the universe had decided I needed to be hit with every possible betrayal in one sitting. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through some files, and turned the screen to face me. These are text messages. I've got a contact who can access phone records if the price is right and the cause is just. Your wife and Roman have been very busy texting each other. Want to read them, or should I give you the highlights? I grabbed the phone, scrolling through messages that made my blood pressure spike with every word. Can't wait for Tuesday. He's so clueless, it's almost sad. After the anniversary, it'll all be over. That one stopped me cold. After the anniversary. The anniversary where she'd publicly humiliated me. Once he's gone, we can start fresh. Once he's gone. I read that line 3 times, trying to parse what gone meant. Gone as in divorced and out of her life? Or gone as in something more permanent? I looked up at Ivan, who was watching me with the expression of someone who'd seen this kind of thing before and knew it never ended well. What do you think they meant by gone? I asked, hating how my voice shook slightly. He took a long drag from his cigarette. In my experience, nothing good. Could mean they were planning to divorce you and take everything. Could mean they were planning something worse. I've seen enough of these situations to know that when people start talking about someone being gone, you should probably watch your back. Make it look like his fault. I read aloud from another message. What does that mean? Make what look like my fault. Ivan leaned forward, his expression serious. Could be they were planning to frame you for something. Set you up to take the fall for their business dealings. If things went south with Volkov and the authorities started investigating, having a convenient scapegoat would be useful. Rich guy, suddenly divorced, acting erratic, making bad business decisions. Easy to pin financial crimes on someone like that. The picture was coming together, and it was uglier than I'd imagined. This wasn't just infidelity. This was conspiracy. They'd been planning to destroy me, legally and possibly financially, maybe even physically. That toast at the anniversary dinner wasn't a spontaneous decision born from unhappiness. It was calculated. It was a public declaration that I was unstable, unreliable, someone whose word couldn't be trusted when I inevitably protested my innocence. I felt something cold settle in my chest, pushing out the last remnants of heartbreak and replacing them with pure determination. I need copies of everything, I told Ivan. Every photo, every document, every text message. I need proof of all of this. He nodded, like he'd been expecting this. Already made you a complete set. It's in the folder. I also put everything on a flash drive because you should have redundant copies of this stuff. Trust me, you don't want to lose this evidence. He pulled out a small USB drive and slid it across the table. But I need to ask you something. What are you planning to do with this information? That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? I could go to the police, but with Clara's connections and money, they'd probably just bury it. I could confront her directly, but that would tip her off that I knew, and she'd have time to cover her tracks or worse, accelerate whatever plans she had for getting me gone. I could disappear even further, take my money and run to some country without an extradition treaty and spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. None of those options felt right. None of them felt like justice. I don't know yet, I admitted. but I'll figure it out. And when I do, I want to make sure it's airtight. No room for error, no way for them to weasel out of it. Ivan studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but let me give you some advice, free of charge. Whatever you're planning, be smart about it. People like Clara and Roman, they've got resources. They've got connections. If you come at them, you better make sure you don't miss, because you won't get a second shot. He stubbed out his cigarette and stood up, our meeting apparently over. Stay in touch. If you need more surveillance or information, you know where to find me. And watch your back. If they were talking about getting you gone, they might still be planning something. I left the cafe with the folder and flash drive feeling like I was carrying explosives. In a way, I was. This information could blow up Clara's life, Roman's life, possibly bring down whatever criminal enterprise they were involved in with Volkov. But it could also blow up in my face if I wasn't careful. I needed a plan, and not just any plan. I needed something brilliant and foolproof and completely devastating. I went back to my tiny apartment and spread everything out on the floor, photos and documents, creating a map of betrayal across the worn carpet. My laptop sat nearby, and I stared at it for a long moment before a thought occurred to me. Clara always thought she was smarter than me. It was one of her favorite subtle put-downs, the way she'd explain things like I was a child who needed extra help understanding basic concepts. She thought she was clever, covering her tracks, playing her games. But Clara had one fatal flaw that I'd always known about, but never thought to exploit. She was terrible with passwords. She used the same password for everything. Love Clara 2010, the year we'd started dating. She'd never changed it, not once in 12 years, despite me suggesting multiple times that using the same password for every account was a security nightmare. She'd just laugh and say who would want to hack her anyway. She wasn't that interesting. Turns out, she was more interesting than I'd thought, just not in good ways. I opened my laptop and navigated to the email provider we both used. Typed in her email address. Hesitated for just a moment, my finger hovering over the keyboard, crossing a line I couldn't uncross. Then I typed, Love Clara 2010. Hit enter. And just like that, I was in. Her entire digital life spread out before me like a book I'd been given permission to read. Emails from Roman, emails from Volkov, emails from lawyers and accountants, and people I'd never heard of. I started at the beginning, months back, and began reading everything, downloading everything, building a case against my own wife that would make prosecutors weep with joy. After spending 3 days reading through Clara's emails like they were the world's most depressing novel series, I needed to disappear even further. St. Petersburg suddenly felt too close to Moscow, too connected to the life I was trying to leave behind. I needed somewhere remote, somewhere nobody would think to look for me, somewhere I could process everything I'd learned and figure out my next move without worrying about Clara or Roman or their criminal buddy Volkov showing up to make me gone in the permanent sense. So naturally, I decided to move to Siberia, because when you're having an emotional breakdown and planning revenge, why not do it somewhere where the temperature can literally kill you if you're not careful? I found a village called Withdrew, which sounded like something out of a fairy tale, but was actually just a collection of buildings in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by forests and mountains, and the kind of isolation that makes you question your life choices. The kind of place where the postal service came once a month if you were lucky, and the nearest grocery store was a 3-hour drive away. Perfect. I told Ivan where I was going, because someone needed to know in case I died of exposure or bear attack, and he looked at me like I'd announced I was moving to Mars. Siberia, he'd said, shaking his head. That's not running away. That's running to the edge of the earth and then jumping off. You sure about this? I wasn't sure about anything anymore, but I went anyway. The train ride took forever. Hours upon hours of watching the landscape change from city to countryside to increasingly hostile wilderness. I shared a compartment with an old woman who was knitting something that might have been a sweater or might have been a punishment. I couldn't tell. She didn't ask questions, which I appreciated, just clacked away with her needles and occasionally offered me hard candies that tasted like they'd been manufactured during the Stalin era. By the time I reached the closest station to Withdrew, I'd read every email in Clara's account twice, memorized bank account numbers, and developed a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. Probably both. The cabin I'd rented sight unseen from a guy named Yuri who I'd found through some sketchy online forum was exactly as advertised, which is to say it was terrible but functional. 1 room, a wood stove that looked like it had been salvaged from a museum, a bed that was more of a wooden platform with a thin mattress, and walls that I suspected provided about as much insulation as a cardboard box. The windows were small and frosted over, and there was a persistent draft that came from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The bathroom was an outhouse about 50 feet from the cabin, which meant any midnight bathroom trips required getting fully dressed and potentially encountering wildlife. Living the dream, truly. But you know what? It was perfect. Nobody knew where I was. Nobody could find me even if they tried. I had no neighbors except for the occasional bear who wandered by and stared at me through the window like I was the intruder in his forest, which, fair point, I was. I spent my days chopping wood because that's what you do in Siberia if you want to not freeze to death. And let me tell you, chopping wood is surprisingly therapeutic. Every swing of the axe felt like I was cutting through my old life, splitting it into pieces small enough to burn. I got pretty good at it too. Turned out I had a lot of aggression to work through, and wood was a much healthier target than the alternative. The nights were harder. When the sun went down, which it did very early and very thoroughly in Siberian winter, the darkness was absolute. No street lights, no car headlights, no ambient glow from the city. Just darkness so complete it felt like being inside a cave. I'd sit by the wood stove, reading by lamplight because electricity was spotty at best, working my way through Russian literature because apparently my brain decided this was the perfect time to get cultured. Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Chekhov, all the greatest hits of Russian misery. It felt appropriate. I was living in a cabin in Siberia reading about other people's suffering and somehow finding it comforting. This was either character development or a complete psychological breakdown, and honestly, I wasn't sure there was much difference anymore. I called Ivan once a week using a satellite phone that I'd bought from a guy in St. Petersburg who asked no questions and took cash. The connection was terrible, lots of static and delay, like talking to someone on the moon. But Ivan's updates came through clearly enough. "She thinks you're dead," he told me one night, his voice crackling through the interference. "Not literally dead, but dead to the world. She's been telling people you had a breakdown after the divorce, that you disappeared, that she's worried about you." The last part made me laugh so hard I almost dropped the phone. Clara worried about me? Please. The woman who'd wished me out of existence was now playing the concerned ex-wife card? That was rich. What's she telling them exactly? I asked, watching snow fall outside my window in sheets so thick I could barely see the trees 20 feet away. "That you couldn't handle the split," Ivan said. "That you became unstable, made some poor financial decisions, and vanished. She's painting herself as the victim here, the poor woman whose husband fell apart and abandoned everything. Some people are buying it. Others, not so much. But she's got enough credibility and sympathy that most of her social circle is taking her side." Of course they were. Clara was always good at controlling narratives, shaping stories to make herself look good. It was one of her talents, right up there with picking out expensive wine and destroying people's lives. "Let her think I'm broken," I said, and I meant it. Let her think she won. Let her get comfortable and confident and careless. Because that's when people make mistakes. Ivan was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was careful, measured. "What are you planning, friend? Because I've been doing this job for a long time, and I know that tone. That's the tone of someone planning something big." I smiled at my reflection in the frosted window, barely recognizing the bearded, weathered face staring back at me. "Revenge doesn't need fireworks, Ivan. It needs patience and good Wi-Fi. And I've got plenty of both." The weeks blurred together in Siberia. Wake up, chop wood, eat something that could generously be called food, but was mostly just calories to keep me alive, translate some documents for money, read more depressing Russian literature, sleep, repeat. I grew a beard because shaving seemed pointless, and also because the extra face insulation was actually helpful in the cold. My hands got calloused from the axe work. I lost weight because apparently living in Siberia and eating mostly canned goods is a very effective diet plan, though I wouldn't recommend it. I looked like a completely different person from the guy who'd stood at that anniversary dinner. I looked like someone who'd gone to war and come back different. Which, in a way, I had. But I wasn't just surviving out there in the wilderness. I was planning. Every night, I'd boot up my laptop, connect to the satellite internet that cost a fortune and worked about as well as you'd expect, and continue building my case against Clara and Roman. I'd downloaded everything from Clara's email before she could realize someone had accessed her account. Every incriminating message, every financial document, every piece of evidence that proved they weren't just having an affair, but were actively involved in fraud and money laundering. I organized it all, created folders and subfolders, cross-referenced dates and amounts, built a timeline of their criminal enterprise that would make prosecutors salivate. I found out things I wish I hadn't, like how they'd laughed about me, called me the puppy in their messages because apparently I was so trusting and loyal it was funny to them. How they discussed the best way to humiliate me at the anniversary dinner. How Clara had actually practiced her toast to make sure it had maximum impact. How they'd planned to frame me for their money laundering scheme, setting up accounts in my name, forging my signature on documents, creating a paper trail that would lead investigators straight to me while they walked away clean. It was sophisticated, I had to admit. Evil, but sophisticated. There were moments, alone in that cabin with nothing but the wind howling outside and my thoughts howling inside, when I wondered if I should just let it go. Take my money, disappear to some tropical beach, change my name permanently, and live out my days as someone else entirely. Let Clara and Roman have their criminal empire and their affair and their perfect life built on lies. I could be free of all of it, free of the anger and the hurt and the burning need for justice that was consuming me from the inside out. But then I'd remember her face at that dinner, that smile that said she thought she'd won, and I'd know I couldn't let it go. Not because I still loved her, I definitely didn't anymore, but because people like Clara and Roman needed to learn that actions have consequences, and betrayal has a price. My sister Sophia called one night, somehow getting through on the satellite phone despite the interference. "Are you alive?" were her first words, which seemed like a reasonable question given that I'd basically vanished off the face of the earth. "Depends on your definition of alive," I told her. "I'm breathing, eating, existing. Is that alive?" She sighed, and I could picture her shaking her head in that way she did when I was being difficult. "Everyone's worried. Mom's worried. Dad's worried. I'm worried. Clara's telling everyone you had a breakdown." The way she said Clara's name suggested she wasn't buying whatever story my ex-wife was selling. "I did have a breakdown," I admitted. "But I'm putting myself back together, just in a different configuration. Like reverse Humpty Dumpty. All the pieces are there. They're just arranged differently now." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "Where are you? And please don't say Siberia because that would be insane." I looked around at my cabin, at the wood stove and the frozen windows and the complete isolation, and smiled. "Would I lie to you?" "Yes," she said immediately. "You absolutely would." "Fair point. I'm somewhere safe," I told her. "Somewhere I can think clearly without distractions. I'll come back when I'm ready, when everything's in place." "When what's in place?" she asked. "Just trust me. And tell Mom and Dad I'm fine." 3 months into my Siberian exile, Ivan called with news that made me drop the piece of what I'd been about to throw into the stove. "They're making their move," he said, his voice cutting through the static like a knife. "Big shipment coming in next week. Warehouse on the outskirts of Moscow. Whatever they've been planning, this is it." My heart started racing in a way that had nothing to do with the physical labor I'd been doing. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for, the opportunity I'd been preparing for during all those cold nights reading their emails and building my case. "Tell me everything," I said, grabbing a notebook and pen because suddenly my isolated cabin in the middle of nowhere felt like a command center. Ivan rattled off details that he'd pieced together from following them, bribing the right people, and generally being excellent at his job. Clara and Roman were meeting with Volkov and several other men at an old factory that had been abandoned for years, the kind of place that probably had more rats than square footage. They were moving a shipment of something. Ivan wasn't entirely sure what, but the money involved was substantial. Millions of rubles changing hands, documents being signed, the kind of transaction that definitely wasn't legal and definitely wasn't something you want documented. "When?" I asked, already mentally planning my return to Moscow. "Next Thursday night, 11 p.m. I've got the exact address." He paused, and I could hear him lighting another cigarette through the phone. "What are you thinking of doing? Because if you're planning what I think you're planning, you need to be very careful. These aren't people you want to mess with." I smiled, looking at my reflection in the dark window, barely recognizing the bearded, hardened man staring back at me. "I'm thinking it's time to come home, Ivan. Time to remind Clara that some ghosts don't stay buried." The journey back to Moscow felt surreal, like I was traveling back in time to a life that had belonged to someone else. I'd cleaned up a bit before leaving Siberia, trimmed my beard to something less mountain man and more guy who made deliberate style choices, put on clothes that didn't smell like wood smoke in isolation. But I kept the edge, the hardness that 3 months of chopping wood and plotting revenge had given me. I needed that edge for what was coming next. Ivan met me at the train station, and his eyes widened when he saw me. "You look different," he said, which was probably the understatement of the century. "I am different," I replied. We spent the next few days preparing. Ivan showed me surveillance photos of the warehouse, the layout, the usual security measures. It was perfect for what they were doing, isolated enough that nobody would notice unusual activity, but still accessible enough for trucks and vehicles to come and go. The building itself was massive, one of those Soviet-era industrial complexes that had been built to last forever and now just sat there decaying gracefully, waiting for someone to either renovate it or tear it down. There were multiple entrances, plenty of places to hide, and most importantly, plenty of places to observe without being seen. "The meeting's scheduled for 11, Ivan said, pointing to a spot on the map where he'd marked the main entrance. "They usually show up separately, Clara first, then Roman, then Volkov and his associates. They think they're being careful, but they're predictable. Same pattern every time." I studied the layout, memorizing exits and sight lines. "How many people are we talking about?" Ivan considered. "Clara, Roman, Volkov for sure. Probably 4 or 5 other guys, Volkov's muscle and business partners. They're not going to be armed, probably. This is supposed to be a business transaction, but I wouldn't bet my life on it." Thursday night arrived cold and clear, the kind of Moscow winter night where your breath freezes in the air and every sound carries further than it should. I dressed in all black, not because I was trying to be dramatic, but because blending into shadows seemed like a practical choice. Ivan drove me to a spot about half a mile from the warehouse, a location where his car wouldn't be noticed, but where I could approach on foot. "You've got the camera?" he asked for the 3rd time, and I held up the small device that I'd bought specifically for this. High-quality video, night vision capability, audio recording, everything I needed to document whatever was about to happen. "I've got it," I assured him. "And I've got the evidence files backed up in 3 different locations, so even if something happens to me tonight, everything gets released automatically." Ivan looked at me with something that might have been respect or might have been concern, possibly both. "You've thought this through." "I've had a lot of time to think," I replied. 3 months in Siberia with nothing but my thoughts and questionable canned meat. Makes you very thorough. I approached the warehouse on foot, moving carefully through the shadows of other abandoned buildings that surrounded it. The area was like a graveyard of Soviet industry, concrete and rust, and broken windows as far as you could see. It would have been depressing if I wasn't so focused on my mission. I found a good vantage point, an old loading dock area that had a clear view of the main entrance, but was high enough and dark enough that I'd be invisible. I settled in, camera ready, and waited. Clara arrived first, exactly like Ivan had predicted. She pulled up in her Mercedes, all sleek lines and expensive German engineering, and stepped out wearing that red coat she'd always loved. Even from a distance, even knowing everything I knew about her now, she was still beautiful. That was the worst part. How someone could be so beautiful on the outside and so ugly on the inside. She looked around nervously, checking her phone, and then walked into the warehouse like she owned the place. Which, knowing Clara, she probably thought she did. Roman showed up 10 minutes later in his Porsche, because of course he drove a Porsche. He was tall and confident, moving with the kind of ease that came from never having faced real consequences for anything in his life. That was about to change. I watched him enter the warehouse, and then I waited for Volkov and his crew. They arrived in 2 black SUVs that screamed, "We're definitely doing something illegal," parking in a way that blocked the main entrance like they were worried about needing to make a quick exit. I moved closer, finding a broken window on the 2nd floor that gave me a perfect view of the main floor below. The warehouse was mostly empty except for some old machinery and crates, but they'd set up a makeshift meeting area with a table and chairs that looked ridiculous in the cavernous space. I started recording just as they all gathered around the table. Clara stood next to Roman, close enough that their shoulders touched, and I felt nothing. No jealousy, no pain, just cold satisfaction that I was about to catch them in the act. Volkov was speaking, gesturing to papers on the table, and I adjusted the camera's zoom to capture everything. Even without hearing every word, the scene was clear. Money changing hands, documents being signed, a shipment being discussed with hand gestures that suggested large quantities of something they definitely shouldn't be moving. Clara laughed at something Roman said, touching his arm, and I captured that too. Every moment of their criminal conspiracy, every piece of evidence prosecutors would need. Once he's gone, we're untouchable, Roman said, his voice carrying in the empty warehouse, and I realized he was talking about me. I told you, Clara whispered, but her voice carried too. He was too soft, too trusting. We could have robbed him blind, and he wouldn't have noticed until it was too late. She was right about that. I had been too soft, too trusting. But soft things can harden when you leave them in the cold long enough, and I'd spent 3 months in Siberia freezing into something new. I didn't stick around to watch the rest of their meeting. I had everything I needed on camera, every incriminating word and gesture captured in high definition. I climbed down from my perch carefully, making sure not to make any noise that would alert them to my presence. The last thing I needed was Volkov's muscle coming after me before I could execute the final phase of my plan. Ivan was waiting where I'd left him, engine running, looking nervous in a way I'd never seen from him before. "You get it?" he asked as soon as I climbed into the car. I held up the camera like it was a trophy. Every single second. "It's beautiful, Ivan. Netflix-worthy." We drove to a location I'd scouted earlier, a 24-hour internet cafe that catered to insomniacs and people doing things they probably shouldn't be doing online. Perfect for my purposes. I uploaded everything to the cloud, made copies, and then sat down to compose the most important email of my life. The recipient? Chief Inspector Anatoly Petrov of Moscow's Financial Crimes Division, a man whose reputation for hating corruption was legendary. I'd done my research during those long Siberian nights. Petrov was incorruptible, a rare breed in Russian law enforcement, and he'd been trying to nail people like Volkov for years. "Dear Inspector Petrov," I typed, my fingers flying across the keyboard with purpose. "I'm writing to provide evidence of an ongoing criminal enterprise involving fraud, money laundering, and illegal weapons trading." I attached everything. The emails from Clara's account, the financial records, the photos Ivan had taken, and the video from tonight. Years of criminal activity, packaged and delivered with a bow. I hit send at exactly 2:47 a.m. and felt something release in my chest that I hadn't known was there. The police moved fast. Faster than I'd expected, which suggested that Petrov had been waiting for exactly this kind of gift. By dawn, SWAT teams had surrounded the warehouse. I watched from a safe distance as they stormed in, and the satisfaction was better than any therapy could have provided. Clara's scream echoed across the empty industrial complex when they slapped handcuffs on her wrists. Roman tried to run, which was honestly hilarious considering he was surrounded by armed officers. Volkov just stood there looking resigned, like he'd always known this day would come. The morning news was poetry. Billionaire Clara Ivanova arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. The headline scrolled across every channel, accompanied by her mugshot that somehow managed to make her look both furious and terrified. Roman's photo was next to hers, and he looked like a raccoon who'd been caught raiding someone's trash can at 3 in the morning. Volkov's mugshot completed the collection, stoic and unbothered like getting arrested was just another Tuesday. Ivan texted me a single word, "Finished." I texted back, "No, Ivan. They did it to themselves." I just held the mirror. Then I turned off my phone, walked out of the cafe into the Moscow dawn, and smiled for the first time in months. Real justice, it turned out, was even sweeter than I'd imagined. Lisbon smells like salt and freedom, which sounds poetic but is actually just accurate. The sea breeze comes off the Atlantic every morning, carrying with it the promise that yesterday doesn't matter and tomorrow is yours to design. I live in a small apartment in Alfama now, the old district where the streets are so narrow you can touch both walls if you spread your arms wide enough. My neighbors are mostly elderly Portuguese ladies who treat me like an adopted grandson and occasionally leave food outside my door when they think I'm not eating enough. They call me Alex Orlov, and they have no idea that name is as real as a $3 bill. My mornings start with coffee at a cafe down the street where the owner, Miguel, makes the best espresso I've ever had, and doesn't ask questions about why a Russian guy suddenly showed up speaking decent Portuguese and looking like he was running from something. Maybe everyone in Lisbon is running from something. It's that kind of city, full of people reinventing themselves against a backdrop of colorful tiles and ancient tramways. I spend my afternoons writing, which surprised me as much as anyone. Turns out I have stories to tell now, though I change the names and locations because I'm not completely stupid. My sister Sophia calls sometimes, usually when she's had wine and is feeling nostalgic. "You're really never coming back?" she asked last week, and I could hear Moscow traffic in the background, that familiar sound of horns and shouting that I don't miss at all. "Nope," I told her, watching sunset paint the Tagus River gold from my window. "Russia already had its shot at me, and it missed." She laughed at that, but it was sad laughter. "Mom asks about you. Dad too. They want to know when you're coming home for a visit. Tell them maybe next year," I said, lying through my teeth because we both knew I wasn't coming back. "Tell them I'm happy, because I actually am. And that's the weird part, the part that makes this whole ridiculous story worth it. I'm happy. Not in the fake way I was happy when I was married to Clara, pretending everything was fine while ignoring the cracks forming beneath my feet. Real happy. The kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and not apologizing for it. Sometimes I wonder if Clara ever thinks about that toast, if she ever regrets wishing me out of her life while she's sitting in whatever prison cell they've got her in. Probably not. People like Clara don't do regret. They do excuses and justifications and blame everyone else for their choices. But if she does ever think about it, late at night when the prison is quiet and there's nothing to distract her from her thoughts, I hope she remembers this. She wished I'd never been in her life. Now I'm not. And honestly, that's the happiest ending I could have written. Living well isn't just the best revenge. It's the only revenge that actually matters.